Generative AI is, in a sense, the second wave of transformative AI that we've experienced over the past few decades. And that first wave was really around ranking systems. And so you're thinking here about Google's search, Facebook, YouTube's recommendations, TikTok. All of this is around choosing sort of the ranking of information that was already created by people. And this seems like a small thing. It's just ranking a set of items. But when you're ranking everything that humanity has created, that actually affects the incentives of politicians, of entertainers, of journalists. You're now restructuring society just by that simple act of ranking, because you're ranking for billions of people every day, all the time. The second wave is where we go beyond ranking to actually generating that content. This second wave of transformative artificial intelligence, we don't know fully what those implications are going to be. The whole way in which we make information and the basis of communication across society, like that is all going to be rewired.
At its simplest, generative AI refers to an AI tool that is generating or creating content that could be text, audio, or video. You're taking a really large data set and you're inputting a prompt, and then you're outputting something completely new that is learning from all that info and creating something to answer the prompt. We've covered AI for some time at Forbes, but on November 30th, when OpenAI launched ChatGPT, its tool that allows you to, ask for a recipe or a sonnet in the form of Shakespeare, or a script in the form of, Alex as movie star, which my boss did. He also asked it to write an annual performance review for me, which I did not appreciate. When we saw everyone playing with these tools, we thought, okay, AI is really breaking into the mainstream here. It's not just something that the tech bubble cares about. And it's time to ask questions about who's really going to make money here, how real is this hype, and what will be the business impacts. OpenAI is a really interesting company. It actually started as a nonprofit. It was backed by Sam Altman, who used to run Y Combinator, as well as the billionaires Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. And it was formed with the idea of creating an artificial general intelligence. This is a real kind of sci-fi AI, one that is conscious, self-learning, that could theoretically rethink capitalism, as Sam Altman has said, or could potentially outstrip human control. Building that AGI was something that OpenAI could not do as a nonprofit. It couldn't raise enough money to do this, so it needed to create a for-profit entity. OpenAI does that in 2019, and that's when Sam Altman becomes CEO full-time. And not long after, we've seen the company become a key ally to Microsoft, which has reportedly invested $10 billion recently at a $29 billion valuation.
This current wave that we're seeing, this generative AI wave, has been kind of building up for the last couple months now, really hitting an inflection point probably summer of 2022. We were slowly seeing these different companies starting to tease out, new releases, like OpenAI launching DALL-E 2 in beta, and then Stability AI announced Stable Diffusion, this text-to-image generation model. I think really it was the culmination of all these different models that reached a viral moment, really got to the masses. I would characterize the consensus as cautiously optimistic, I think there's not so much pessimism around AI as a technology anymore. I think more than optimism, it's kind of gotten to a point where people are accepting that this is an inevitability. Now, what do we do with this inevitability? Different folks have different levels of bullishness on where this technology can take us or what the potential harms and risks of it are. But for the most part, people seem to be optimistic that we still have time. It's still kind of in our hands to kind of control the destiny that this new AI paradigm shift brings.
I think the way to look at this is if Steve Jobs said that, the phone was a bicycle for the mind, this technology is really a rocket ship for the mind. The most exciting application, I think, of this generative AI is with what we're building, allowing humans to communicate visually. So you can take what's in your mind and create it almost instantly, whereas before it would have taken days or months even for skilled individuals to do that, be it art or PowerPoint or whatever else. I think we've also seen the impact of this also emerge in other sectors, such as education, where students are now using it to help with their homework structuring or writing. And I think we'll see it across everything, whereby, again, anything you can imagine, you'll be able to create now. At Stability, our differential is that we are open source, so we release our models, so there's an amazing community that's built around it. If you look at popularity on the code base, it's outstripped things like Bitcoin and Ethereum in a few months, what took them 10 years. The types of applications that we're seeing are largely around basic creativity at the moment, but now they are extending into combining these things to create video game assets, to create artwork of various types, to create new textures and things like that, to extend the capabilities of creators and to make more people creators.
I think where it goes from here, I think we'll see more and more business workflow use cases. Definitely expect to see these big tech companies like Microsoft and Google that are building some of these models and kind of working with companies like OpenAI on these models to start integrating them more deeply into some of the existing software we know. So for example, we could expect to see generative AI use cases in Microsoft Word or Microsoft Outlook, Google Docs, stuff like that. I think one of the open questions remains, are we going to see like an entirely new wave of AI native applications kind of become a whole new generation of software tools that people use? Or will it be kind of the existing options that are able to integrate this AI faster and stay ahead of the curve? For example, Adobe putting this AI into Photoshop versus an entirely new like AI-powered photo editor coming about.
Speaking to Bill Gates about AI, I was honestly a little surprised just how excited he was. I asked him, how does this compare to previous technological cycles like the rise of the PC, or the PC with, graphics interfaces that allow us to play games and do a lot more, graphically inclined things on computers, or even the internet itself. And Bill said that he thinks this is one of the 4 big technological changes of his lifetime. And he said that he thinks AI will deservedly be the hottest topic of this year. Overall, I would say Bill Gates was optimistic about the impact that these AI tools could have, particularly in the developing world where he spends a lot of his thoughts with his foundation. He was thinking about how in Africa, some people may not have access to human doctors. You can do a lot as a foundation to try to get doctors to that place or train new doctors. But an AI tool that could answer some basic medical questions could fill a need without challenging doctors' professions. Similarly, he was thinking in, lower income neighborhoods here at home in the US. There might be some math tutoring or basic homework support or teaching support that a tool like this could use for students who don't have access to human tutors or don't have a lot of time with a teacher.
So with AI, you can do existing use cases better than before, right? So you can improve search, for example. You can improve moderation in social networks. You can improve communication by adding virtual backgrounds, for example, to this video. You can also create completely new use cases that were just not possible before, right? You can generate image from text. You can generate 3D from text. You can recognize voice and translate that. You can create better conversational AI. So it really opens up a new range of possibilities. The same way the previous generation of technology created the ability for machines to calculate better or to retrieve information better with search engine. There's a whole range of new use cases that weren't possible before that are now made possible by machine learning. The hype that we're seeing now is just a catch-up on the previous wave of usage. This is very different, for example, than crypto, where you had a lot of hype, but very little usage. I think it's quite sustainable. And as we see more use cases, more usage, more companies investing on the topic in 2023, hopefully it's going to become more and more of a mainstream topic and more central topic. What we want is for everyone to understand AI, understand what it can do, what it can't do, some of the challenges associated with it. For example, biases are a big challenge for AI systems today. We want everyone to, understand that so that they can, help us mitigate some of the risk and make sure it doesn't create more challenges.
So there are number of issues that fall into different categories that still need to be resolved with this AI. As flashy and exciting as some of this new technology is, it's still prone to errors and mistakes. AI practitioners call it like hallucination, where you might ask OpenAI's ChatGPT a basic math problem and it will very confidently give you an answer, but it turns out the answer is completely wrong. That could, in a business capacity, hurt a business if they're kind of using inaccurate information, taking it at face value. Beyond that, there are kind of more deeper ethical concerns that have not been addressed. One of them being the copyright and IP around this new AI. The way that this generative AI is possible is these companies have trained their AI models on just massive quantities of data, and a lot of that data is pulled from the internet, So take an example like Stable Diffusion, which is trained on millions and millions and millions of images around the internet.
Stability AI, which is one of the companies that we write about in our coverage and is behind Stable Diffusion, they've been sued recently by Getty Images, which is alleging that they used millions of Getty's photos to allegedly train the models without paying Getty a dime for their work. There's also a lawsuit going on against OpenAI, Microsoft, and GitHub, which is owned by Microsoft, from programmers who believe that the code that you can get, which is usable, it's not perfect, but it can actually save time for some programmers today, that code comes from programmers who similarly were not compensated for their work.
The rate of change that I expect that we're going to be seeing over the next few years makes me concerned that we are not going to be ready for what's coming next. And yes, we're better at the issues from 10 years ago, but we still haven't even solved the problems that have been caused by the old transformation where ranking systems sort of reshaped our society. Right now, there's two main sort of camps within the tech world in terms of how we're going to govern this technology. And one is we're just going to give everyone the power as an individual to do whatever they want with it. And the other is that the tech companies themselves will decide what you can do. And both of those don't seem really great. Like, yes, it's nice for us to have individual power, but if everyone has the power to mess with democracy, if everyone has the power to harass others, to extort others, to generate scams quickly on demand, like that maybe isn't really good for the world. There's a question of what else is there, right? And that is what democracy tries to do. It's can we take that question of how this technology should impact society and bring it to a process where those decisions are being really considered in terms of their impacts. But the challenge is that our current democratic systems are frankly too slow, and the AI advances are both incredibly quick and they're global. One of the most terrifying and in many ways exciting applications of generative AI is to copy our voices. That's incredibly useful for translating across languages. So you can have you just speaking in any language, and it really sounds like you. But the downside there is someone can use that same technology to just copy your voice saying anything they want. We had companies in the space that were really responsible, as well as one could be, and they had a lot of safeguards to make it so that it was really hard to copy someone's voice without their consent. But that all changed very recently when a number of companies just came out without doing that. It's sort of like you're lowering the bar for responsibility because these new entrants are coming in because it's cheaper to not build in that extra tech, and it makes it easier to use. And so we can't live in a world where people keep undercutting those responsibility practices. There is real risk that we are moving toward a world where people just don't have any sense of what is real, and they just sort of give up on that. And we've already seen that obviously in many parts of the world, the sort of what I've been calling reality apathy. That is not the ingredient that we need if we want to have functional society, functional democracy. Like, society is built on trust. Economics is built on trust. Politics is built on trust. And we get into a really dark place when we don't know what we can believe.
I think it's very difficult to see where this AI will not impact anywhere that a human and a computer interface, from better chatbots to the whole of the media industry changing to create faster, better output, and even areas like education and healthcare, augmenting human potential in these areas. It's hard keeping up to date with what generative AI looks like next week, let alone 1 year or 5 years, but I think in the next few years we're going to see video, we're going to see audio, 3D, the ability to really create any world you can imagine. And I think that will be amazing. I think we'll see it in areas like education, healthcare, and others, really helping and enhancing our ability to aid people. And I think that's going to be great to see because it can integrate into existing systems, unlike other things like maybe the metaverse or Web3 that always created their own systems and there was never really immediate value for.
A couple things that have shocked me about AI as I've gotten to know this space. One is that I feel like we're not all as unique as we think we are. These tools are pretty good at predicting what an email to reject a PR pitch looks like. Or right back at me, the kind of way to send a PR pitch to someone like Alex the reporter. That kind of communication is actually pretty well predicted. And so I think that we're going to see these AI tools, being useful there much earlier than I would have guessed. Sam Altman declined to be photographed for our Forbes story. We did photograph Greg Brockman and a couple other leading entrepreneurs in this space. But for Sam, we thought it would be really fitting to use his own tools to generate an image of himself. So we put into a prompt in OpenAI's image generating tool called DALL-E that said, Sam Altman on the cover of Forbes. We got some weird ones back, including a cover of sort of a blurry-faced, uncanny valley, Sam Altman-like person holding a cover of a magazine like Forbes with the same image of blurry Sam Altman. We've already seen some media companies starting to explore how to use these AI tools themselves, some elegantly, some actually getting in trouble for publishing stories written by an AI tool and not disclosing it right away. I think this is a debate that's going to happen across the media landscape. For someone like me, I'm actually not concerned. I do believe that just like using an iPhone or a transcription tool or other pieces of technology in my job, I'll be using AI to do my work better. If the AI can replace my work, then I don't think I'm doing a good job.
I think our sense talking to these founders, these investors, is that a lot of the coolest applications that are going to come out of this, AI wave haven't even been invented yet, maybe haven't even been imagined yet. That said, it seems like for the most part, starting out, where this AI is going to be applied is in some of the more boring places, some of the more busy workplaces. How do we integrate this AI into our basic business workflow? So I think you're starting to see kind of consumer behaviors change. Students, for example, are already kind of using ChatGPT to generate essays for them. Some artists are using models like Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, or OpenAI's DALL-E to help them create works of art.
I think because machine learning is such a different paradigm as typical software, there's going to be like a flock, like a wave of AI, ML native startups that are going to do things, build products 100 times better than the incumbents who have not been able to build machine learning the same way. So this is very exciting because I think we really have the opportunity to change the paradigm completely and make emerge a whole group of newcomers and new companies that are going to be able to do things differently.
What we can do is you can use sort of new forms of democratic processes. And this is what I've been calling sort of platform democracy or AI democracy, to ask a sort of representative selection of the global population. Like, how should this technology be used? How should it be deployed? It sounds crazy to say this, but there already are pilots of this sort of global process. And the reason why you need it to be global is because this technology affects everyone. It creates legitimacy. It makes it really, really hard for companies to then be like, oh, we're democratizing this technology. when really what they mean is we're giving everyone the ability to just like mess with everything. That isn't what a democratic process, that isn't what considered deliberation would have led to if you had the people who are being impacted by that technology in the room. We need our AI systems to not just be optimizing for engagement, as we've seen with things like Facebook and TikTok and YouTube, but for the sort of the human values that actually support society and support democracy. And a big part of that is sort of not optimizing for division, which is what comes naturally out of those algorithms in many cases. And so a lot of my work recently has been around how can we instead optimize for bridging divides, making conflict productive as opposed to destructive. So I think that is absolutely core to bake in from the beginning, because we've seen what happens to society when systems that billions of people are using every day are really optimizing for division, and it isn't pretty.
In my opinion, AI and machine learning is becoming the new paradigm to build all technology. In my opinion, AI and machine learning is becoming the new paradigm to build all technology.
If you think about the psychology of a person who decides to be a truck driver, there's something about the freedom of driving a truck around the country, right? So that person is already wired to be kind of like an entrepreneur, someone who loves and craves this freedom.
Cloud Trucks, which is based in San Francisco, helps truckers, especially smaller owner-operators, to manage their operations.
Before Cloud Trucks started, a truck driver would go on something called a load board. They would find a job that they want to take, and then they would call a broker manually, right? So actually call this broker and negotiate with this broker to figure out what the right price is that they should book this load for. And you can imagine that in this negotiation, the driver is at a disadvantage. They're on the road, they are not in front of a computer, so they don't really have the data to know what's going on in the market in real time. With Cloud Trucks, not only are they searching multiple sources at once, so you don't need to go, search by search by search and these different platforms. You have one platform where you're doing this search, but we also tell you, hey, in this current time, here's what we believe is a fair market price for this load, so you're negotiating with confidence.
We had started Cloud Trucks in 2019. Prior to Cloud Trucks, I had worked with Sabena and Scotty, and that was my first exposure to the trucking industry and learning some of these problems that truck drivers face. And we had spoken with local carriers and learned some of the pain points that they face. And to us, we knew that these were really tangible problems that we could use technology to solve.
So one piece of it is the search side of it, making sure that all of this is integrated and aggregated. And another piece of it is something we call the schedule optimizer, where we're recommending these jobs that they should take to maximize their revenue. We do similar things as well with other parts of the problem. So with cash flow, for example, we've built something called a CT Cash, where we're able to pay these drivers instantly after they complete a job, as opposed to having them wait for 30 days or 45 days to get paid. And recently we launched a CT Credit, where we're actually providing a credit card to the truck drivers that work with us as well.
Tobena grew up in Nigeria, where his parents had a soap factory. After he moved to the US, he worked at Zenefits and Open Door. Then he founded self-driving car startup, Scotty Labs. In 2019, he sold Scotty to DoorDash.
I come from a family in Nigeria that's entrepreneurial, and my parents own a manufacturing business back there, and I worked there for a year actually before I moved out to the States for college 15 years ago or so. I've always been interested and attracted to very traditional industries, and manufacturing and trucking are very closely tied. But before I started Cloud Trucks, I started a company called Scotty Labs, where we were building autonomous driving technology for the trucking industry. So I was spending a lot of time talking to truck drivers, understanding their pain points. And over the time running that company, I ran it for about 3 years before it was acquired, I came to learn that a lot of truck drivers wanted to be entrepreneurs. I think what we learned is that a lot of A lot of truck drivers, the company drivers, want to be owner-operators because they want to determine where they get to go, when they get to go there, when they're on the road, when they're at home with their families, right? And a lot of the entrepreneurs just need more help to be able to manage their business more profitably. So the impact that we're seeing is if we do our jobs right and we continue to build out the very best software to make it very easy to operate a trucking business, the owner-operators that exist today, who are primarily the people that we work with, will be more and more successful.
We have BI products that allow drivers to really have data insights on how their business is performing, to get a picture of what's going well, how can they improve, and how are they tracking against their financial goals. And then along with this, we have our schedule optimizer, which just makes it easy, for drivers to plan out revenue maximizing schedules over periods of time. So instead of searching for independent jobs or searching day in, day out, they can put in their preferences and we will generate a revenue maximizing schedule for them.
With $142 million in venture funding, Cloud Trucks hopes to tap into the nation's network of 3.4 million truck drivers.
There are large trucking communities on Facebook. There are large trucking communities in every single state that you go to. And just going out and talking to people and really hearing from them, it's pretty obvious that they want to be entrepreneurs because they want to own their time, right? They want to determine when they're going cross country and when they're spending time at home. I'm not saying that every single truck driver wants to be an entrepreneur, but certainly it's something that's a key part of the trucking industry.
So we're constantly listening to feedback to really understand the pain points our drivers are facing. And this is feedback across multiple channels. So our social media channels, as well as feedback we hear from conversations with our sales team, and feedback they submit directly from the app. And for example, a recent piece of feedback that was acted on was actually drivers preferred to submit preferences in terms of regions as opposed to having to specifically submit specific states or cities, and that was what we had thought of as an engineering team. And so we kind of quickly acted on this feedback and built kind of region-based search and region-based preferences, and we're able to kind of ship this. And so this really embodies the spirit of customer feedback, of customer focus, and continuing to iterate and build towards solving the problems our drivers are facing.
Fintech startups are really exciting because they're innovating in the finance space, which is typically a little bit slower moving. So they're bringing things like new features like early wage access. That plus an easier user experience was just really exciting for people.
So what caused fintech to get so much attention and excitement initially is there's a lot of potential. When you think about meeting customers where they are, delivering banking services more cheaply and efficiently, there's really a lot of opportunities to give better services to people and for much cheaper. And so that combined with COVID, a surge in online transactions, people not wanting to go to a bank in person, really created a lot of tailwinds behind fintech and a ton of interest in investing. There are a bunch of companies getting attention during the past few years. Stripe is a big one. They're a payments giant who make payments a lot easier, and they were valued at $95 billion in 2021. Chime is a digital bank that was valued at $25 billion. Buy now, pay later was a really big category, so companies like Affirm and Klarna got a ton of attention, really high valuations. During COVID especially, there was a view that this was going to change banking completely, and they spent a ton of money on marketing to bring in a lot of users, but the valuations that they were getting end up not being justifiable when you look at the revenue they're bringing in. And so real innovation here, really valuable service, but the business models haven't been as productive and bringing in enough revenue to support the valuations that they really received.
So Jeff and I started out with a really long list that we pulled from CB Insights and PitchBook of companies that hadn't raised in a long time. I think our benchmark was about 18 months. And then as we were researching those companies, we kind of learned about a lot of other ones through interviews with experts and analysts and speaking with people at the companies. A really common theme we saw among the companies was that they raised money and then they expanded really quickly. So they hired a lot of people, they opened new offices, and then as kind of macro conditions changed, they weren't able to upkeep that burn rate, and so they had to let people go, they had to close down offices or products.
Neobanks are digital-first banks that don't have any branch locations. They deliver all their services through online channels, apps, websites, and they're new. Neobanks are essentially in the UK and in Europe, they call them challenger banks, but they're newer banks who are trying to disrupt this traditional brick and mortar bank model. Now, for digital banks, one of the challenges is the business model. They don't have banking charters, which is what allows you to lend to companies and to do it very profitably. Historically, lending has been really banking's best business model. It's how they make the most money. And if you don't have a banking charter, it makes it a lot harder to do it profitably. Another big issue is banks actually serve customers fairly well, especially when you think about more affluent customers, and especially in the US. And people don't have a ton of complaints who are more affluent and use traditional banks. And so where neobanks really thrived was middle and lower income customers. And they did a great job and have done a great job of serving these customers well, lower fees, easier access to services. The challenge is with lower and middle income customers, they don't have as much money, you can't make as much money off of them, unfortunately. And so it becomes harder for these neobanks to actually make a lot of money off them. They're harder to lend to. Varo is one of the companies that stands out for having financial issues right now. They had an interesting model where they went out and spent $100 million on a bank charter, and it took them years. The challenge they're having is they haven't been able to attract enough deposits to really lend profitably. And so, they have a base of 5 million customers, 5 million accounts that they've reported, only $275 million in deposits, so only $52 per account. And so it's really hard for them to make money on lending.
I think venture capital people are still very excited about fintech, but it's more just about seeing what the public markets do and kind of where that bottom is before they start putting more money in.
The industry is going to be fine. Basically what happened here is kind of classic tech bubble, just like we saw in the dot-com bubble, the boom and bust. What happened was you had a lot of innovation, long-term opportunities that people were pursuing, and then a lot of investment flooded in, and too many investors were bidding on the same companies at the same time, and so companies that didn't have half-baked business models got funded pretty easily, and there was too much money chasing too few really good companies, and so what you had was just a big bubble. And now what's happening essentially is kind of the aftermath and the downside of the bubble, where you have a lot of companies that need to do layoffs, a lot of companies that need to really lower their costs so they can get closer to profitability. And what we will see is, a number of companies, as we talked about in our article, shutting down, a number of companies getting acquired, but the industry will be fine, and the strongest companies will ride this out, and some of them maybe even able to gain market share during this tough kind of bear market for fintech.
Pickup trucks are the biggest product segment in the United States by far. Ford's F-Series has been the top-selling vehicle line forever. It was again last year. Americans love pickup trucks, and so this is one segment that Tesla does not play in. And Elon Musk has been promising Tesla would come into the pickup segment for a very long time. A few years ago, the company unveiled the Cybertruck, and the expectation is this is a new type of pickup truck that'll address an enormous market. It's going to be different than any other kind of pickup we've seen before.
I would think that the truck will be core to their business. I mean, as we've seen with the domestic automakers, it is their bread and butter. And I think there could be significant profits for Tesla with a truck. On the EV startup side, Rivian clearly is a competitor because they were out there first and they've got a pickup truck and an SUV. And then Ford with the electric Lightning, and they've got a lot of production capacity that they're ramping up, and they were out there first as a real mass marketer. And then, of course, GM will have both the Chevy Silverado and the GMC Sierra that will be competition as well.
Elon said the vehicle would be priced from about $40,000. I would say objectively, that's a highly unlikely price point for this vehicle. And in fact, as it turns out, over the long history of Tesla, there actually is no Tesla product that's ever sold at the base price that Elon has promised. So most people who are watching the space assume that Cybertruck is going to kick off at a base sale price of around $70,000 to $80,000. Again, it's still sort of unclear. What we do know is it's going to be heavy. A few years ago, Tesla engineers were communicating with California's Department of Motor Vehicles, and they revealed that the likely weight of the vehicle at a minimum would be about 8,500 pounds. And to put that in perspective, that's a couple thousand pounds more than a standard Ford F-150. Cybertruck is likely to be an extremely energy-intense vehicle to produce and manufacture. And that's for a number of reasons. It's using this all sort of steel and aluminum body, so there's a lot of metal going into this vehicle. The batteries themselves are large and very resource intensive. So lots of nickel, lots of cobalt, lots of lithium coming from all over the place. If you look at estimates by something like Argonne National Laboratory, which tries to calculate the carbon intensity of vehicles, including how they're made, every EV sort of starts overweight in terms of carbon emissions relative to, say, a gasoline car. It takes more energy to build an EV because you have to gather all these materials, and the manufacturing process is a little different. Another kind of mild concern, or maybe not so mild concern, is automotive tires. Vehicle tires wear down over time and create dust. There's a chemical treatment on tires that's designed to keep them from wearing out so fast, but it turns out that that particular chemical gets into waterways, rivers, and sea, and is very toxic for certain types of salmon and maybe some other fish. Heavier vehicles produce more of this dust. So there is an argument that if you're putting an 8,500 pound electric truck on the vehicle, that actually is going to be producing more of this tire dust pollution than, say, a conventional gasoline or diesel pickup truck, which may not be as heavy.
Analysts, investors, as well as customers have been eagerly awaiting the release of the Cybertruck, production of which has been delayed on a number of occasions to date. I think at this point, analysts are expecting that the Cybertruck will be released at some point in the first half of 2024, and they see that as part of what will need to happen for Musk to achieve his very ambitious growth targets, which, some view as probably unachievable, but certainly important to making some headway towards those. So I think further delays or hiccups as it relates to that release probably wouldn't be good for the stock.
There are a couple ways to look at it. There may be a group of buyers that never would have considered a pickup truck, but because it's an EV, because it's a Tesla or one of the new EV startups, they will consider it. I think the other big question is, will the core truck buyers that have, driven F-150s and Silverados forever, will they shift to EVs? I'm less certain about that. And then, of course, that leads to the question of what are the volumes going to be? And that's really hard to know because we don't know exactly who will be the buyers and how many of them there will be.
It's been a bumpy ride for Tesla stock for sure, to say the least, over the last year or so. Dating back to mid-April of last year when Elon first announced his Twitter acquisition, through the end of the year, the stock crashed by nearly 70% before rebounding recently. The distraction of the Twitter acquisition to Elon and all the stock that he had to sell to finance it played a big role in a significant decline in Tesla stock. Most of Elon's net worth is derived from his shares of Tesla and his options to buy shares in Tesla, largely driven by the Twitter acquisition. The decline in Tesla stock over the last year or so has taken Elon, who a year ago was the richest person in the world by nearly $50 billion, seen him replaced by Bernard Arnault of LVMH as the world's richest person.
The company, when it introduced itself to the world in 2006, set this really aggressive agenda that we're going to change transportation with sustainable vehicles powered primarily by solar power. So they really wanted to be associated with clean energy, clean transportation from the very beginning. But he also said something important, which was the first vehicle was going to be an expensive one, the Roadster. But each subsequent vehicle would cost less and less and less as the company scaled up and got better at making EVs. Well, we're pretty deep into things now. It's about 17 years, in fact, since the first Roadsters were built. Those cost about $100,000. The average Tesla today retails for about $65,000. I would argue that objectively, the way Tesla products are now positioned, it's harder and harder to make the argument that this is purely an environmentally oriented purchase. From the very beginning, the company knew what it had to do to get people to buy these things, to take EVs seriously. They had to be nice to look at and fun to drive, and they had to have features that were as good as or superior to those in a gasoline engine car. And they did a terrific job with that. What they didn't do was then keep working to make them more affordable and actually more environmentally friendly for more people.
Why this business? Why did you want to get into nuclear?
5 years ago, I set out to solve a problem. Carbon had been increasing. Access to clean energy is becoming difficult across parts of the world, and now we even see the problems with energy security as well. And so I founded the Energy Impact Center, first just a research institute, to take a first principles look at our climate and energy problems across the globe. Our investigation, our interviewing subject matter experts across the country, across academia, across industry, across policymakers, led us to understanding that nuclear was the solution, and it had just become stagnant for unobvious reasons. And so we set out for even more research and more interviews and more investigation to figure out why that was.
Here today with Brett Kugelmass, the founder and CEO of Last Energy, and we are here in what's called a mechanical prototype of your first small nuclear reactor. This is very exciting. This building is, what's the size of the building that we're in now?
It's a cube that's 30 feet by 30 feet by 30 feet.
Okay, and within this cube is housed Last Energy's new nuclear reactor. So this is kind of amazing, but we've reached the point in the world where we're really starting to think about the future of new nuclear advanced reactors. And so Last Energy is working to commercialize this future, but you're doing it in a very different way. So what I'd like to get into is the story of Last Energy and what you're doing that's so different from some of the other companies like GE, Hitachi, and Toshiba and Westinghouse that are trying to build enormous new power plants. Tell me what you're working on.
So what we've taken is the standard pressurized water reactor technology. It's the workhorse of the industry, 300 power plants around the world, 10% of humankind's electricity is produced from this power source, and we have productized it, miniaturized it, and modularized it in order to make it a manufacturable product, in order to bring the cost down and increase the scalability of nuclear energy production across the world.
Okay, so in recent months we've seen some big breakthroughs announced in fusion technology. So nuclear fusion had a big day in late 2022. This was newfangled, new stuff that no one had ever accomplished before. Tell me what's new about your technique.
Yeah, we're innovative in the way that we are not actually introducing any new physics, any new chemistry, any new material science. It's a very different approach towards energy technology innovation. We spent years trying to study what makes new energy systems work, what makes new technology work. And what we found over and over again is if you change too many variables all at the same time, back to that physics or the chemistry or material science, if you deviate from the standard supply chain, you find yourself in a position where every component is 10 times as expensive and you don't actually make any headway on cost reduction.
Our core design principle is use
standardized equipment, off the shelf, one might say, in order to benefit from the experience of so many other industries before us.
So all of the skill set is already here. These guys are accustomed to building huge equipment for the oil and gas industry. And that fits your needs perfectly.
Exactly. So we don't even have to invest in our own facilities to get started. We don't have that huge upfront capital cost. Rather, we get to benefit from already existing facilities and use a contract manufacturing process in order to get off the ground years ahead of schedule.
The kind of vessels that they're manufacturing here, these are very common for the oil and gas industry. How is it that you can use the same types of equipment for nuclear?
Yeah, one of the benefits that we brought about in designing our system initially was to base everything off of the existing oil and gas supply chain. So the oil and gas industry is already used to dealing with high pressure systems, high flow rates of water, pressure vessels, flanges, pipes, you name it. And so by utilizing not only the existing supply chain, but also their existing facilities and the labor force and the expertise, we're able to hit the ground running without having to reinvent the wheel.
Fusion, even if they've made breakthroughs, it could take another 10 or 20 years to test out all the new parts and get to the point where it's economically viable, right? Your plan was to not have anything new, to use the oldest possible technology that's been proven. And so why should people care about Last Energy? Because you're putting it together in some new way?
It's a technology innovation from a systems integration perspective. Okay. We productized nuclear. The challenge with new physics innovations, it's not just the 10 years to get past the physics part and then another 10 years to get past the engineering part. The problem is if your materials, if your supply chain deviate from what's common and scaled across many other industries, you might never be economical.
Okay. So have you sold any of these yet?
So we probably had more commercial success than every other new nuclear startup combined just this last year.
Really?
We've ended up signing contracts throughout Eastern Europe, in Poland, Romania, and now also in the UK as some of our early target markets. We have over 24 projects under development across Europe.
And you've accomplished this just as a startup. I mean, I was led to believe that new nuclear was going to be still years and years away and that you would need only the biggest companies would be able to make it happen.
If you're trying to do too much,
okay.
If you're trying to reinvent components or technology, almost all of the nuclear startups start off with the perspective that there's something wrong with the reactor. Okay, well that takes thousands of people to solve the reactor problem. But if you just use the existing reactor technology, like you can see behind me here, then with just a 40-person company, you can make this type of commercial headway.
My understanding is that you don't have a PhD in nuclear science or anything. You're an entrepreneur. Your previous company involved using drones to study rooftops for insurance companies. How in the world did you go from that to this?
Yeah, so I have an educational background in mechanical engineering and then entrepreneurial experience in a hard tech company in Frontier Tech in building drone technology. But after selling that company in 2017 and wanting to focus on global scale challenges such as energy and climate, I took my time studying the industry, meeting with hundreds of experts first in climate, and then when realizing that nuclear was just totally misunderstood, totally underleveraged, ended up taking thousands more subject matter expert interviews just in the nuclear sector alone.
And so the right problem was shrinking the enormous nuclear power plants that we have around the world into a more manageable size?
That was our solution. The problem that we discovered was construction complexity.
Okay. All right.
So just the time it takes, the interest accrued on your financing charges over that construction period, this ended up, we realized historically, leading to most of the cost of nuclear energy. And so that became the problem to solve, constructability, not reactor physics.
Okay, so problems have led people to think that nuclear is just not going to be affordable. What you found is that it can be very affordable if you shrink it all and use only these off-the-shelf parts?
Go small, go repeatable, and then build your way up to scale. Economies of many instead of the economies of size. That's our approach. I think people's perception of nuclear has definitely changed dramatically over the last few years, really understanding as we start to scale up these renewable systems, some of their shortcomings. The land consumption, material consumption, they themselves have a carbon footprint. And then when you layer all the environmental benefits of nuclear on top of the energy security benefits that we're seeing ever more present throughout Europe in today's day and age, nuclear is becoming the obvious choice, and I think both people and governments are coming around. I mean, we know they are because they came to us looking for solutions.
They came to you, in particular, these Eastern European countries, in part because after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the shutoff of gas to Europe, they realized we need other solutions. We can't just dig more coal to make ends meet.
They always knew that there was an energy security threat, and we've been talking to many of these Eastern European countries, Romania and Poland, for many years. It was just, with the war, it became real to everybody how serious a concern energy security was, so they were able to put their political support behind the projects that they always wanted to anyway, because energy security became a threat to the public, that the public was aware of as well. And so yes, within a month of the war breaking out in Ukraine, we got a call from the Prime Minister of Romania himself, came out, and he cleared room for 2 of our projects at the Mioveni research reactor site.
Now, when we look at some of the biggest obstacles to nuclear, we've got regulatory issues, financing issues. How are you going to pay for things? What's this going to cost anyway?
Yeah, so each one of these units costs us under $100 million to build, and it produces billions of dollars worth of electricity over its lifetime. The way that we have architected our business model is using what's common in the renewables industry known as a power purchase agreement. So what we do is we get our customer, usually a factory of some sort, whether it be aluminum or glass or cement, we get them to sign us up as their utility. They write us a contract saying, here's the price of power over this period of time. We then take that contract to the financial markets, to private equity infrastructure funds. They fund the capex of the facility, and then we both benefit from the electricity sales and the profits of it over time.
You said that that's the way that renewable energy has grown. Indeed, a factory is not going to own its own solar panels or wind turbines, right? They contract through that long-term power purchase agreement. How many years are we talking? 20 years, 30 years?
The contracts that we have in Poland right now are for a 24-year period.
So this is the mock-up, of course, but the plant would be operating for 24 years. Is that the average lifespan?
The plant's lifetime is 42 years. However, with these power purchase agreements, it's much more common for them to be 5, 10, or 20-year power purchase agreements.
It sounds to me like that would incentivize you in a different way than utility companies, perhaps. Because if I'm a big utility company building a nuclear power plant, I know that if I have cost overruns, I can just charge my ratepayers that money. I don't have to eat it myself. But if you're going to continue to own the plant, I mean, that must incentivize you to really keep the costs contained.
Us having ownership from concept through operation through decommissioning is the perfect alignment of incentives. It means that from the design itself, we're designing for affordable electricity, we're designing with decommissioning in mind, we're designing throughout the entire plant's, we've designed the system from the get-go to consider the entire plant's lifetime.
At the end of the lifetime of this plant, you're going to have a lot of nuclear waste, I imagine. That's a big concern of a lot of people. They're still skeptical about the safety of nuclear. How do you deal with that issue?
Most of the safety concerns are perception-based rather than resulting from the physical phenomena of the plant. Yes, it's radioactive, but it's not that radioactive after you shut it down. The heat dissipates very quickly. The radioactivity also, that's the magic of radioactivity. It magically disappears all on its own. And so within just a few months, iodine-131, which is the radionuclide that has a hazard to human health, all gone. Okay, so all of a sudden you've eliminated the health hazard within just a few months of waiting. Within 10 years, most of the heat is gone. And so we've designed our system, this exact same modular frame with decommissioning in mind, to be able to take it apart just as easily as you put it together and bring it to whatever waste storage facility or recycling center you want to bring it to. We've designed our reactor vessel itself to be like a battery cartridge. And we've designed the facility, this nuclear island, with extra battery slots. So every 6 years we come in with a new battery cartridge, a fully fueled reactor vessel, drop it into place, plug it in, and run it for another 6 years. We do that same thing 7 times throughout the lifetime of the facility, and then we let it cool down, and then the whole facility can be packaged up.
So you don't have to remove the spent fuel rods, they just stay here the whole time?
That is one of the key differences in the operational paradigm between us and the standard technology. With the standard PWR technology, you open up the reactor vessel, you shuffle the fuel, you add new fuel. For us, we don't. We simply drop in a new battery cartridge, fully fueled.
What would be the biggest obstacles that you still have to overcome in order to get the first one of these operating?
Yeah, so we've checked off most of the boxes from everything from government approval to technology development. Manufacturability is what we're testing right here. But there are still steps along the way. This mechanical prototype will advance. We're going to test out the disassembly next, the transportability, and continue to make these design enhancements, all serving our greater mission of scalable, easy to construct, reducing complexity to deliver the most affordable, clean power that you could imagine.
Okay, so each one of these units will produce how much electricity?
20 megawatts. It's about the size of a data center or a pulp and paper factory or an automotive manufacturers.
But a big, old school nuclear, those are how many megawatts? 1,000?
A gigawatt, yeah, 1,000 megawatts, so about the size of a 1 million person city, whereas ours would serve a town about the size of 20,000 people.
But if I want more of them, you can build them in parallel?
And that's the other change in the operational paradigm. Another area that we're innovative is borrowing lessons learned from other industries. When you build a solar farm, you don't build one giant solar panel. You build the same solar panel over and over again, you stack them next to each other. The exact same with our micronuclear facilities. If you need 200 megawatts, we're going to install 10 identical 20 megawatt units right next to each other.
So like you were saying, it's counterintuitive. You might give up a little bit of efficiency because your units are smaller, but you're making that up in the ease of manufacturing and installation.
Exactly.
Since there's nothing really new here, what's Last Energy's intellectual property?
Well, there's still quite a bit of technical complexity. The systems integration, the modularization, the manufacturability, these are all incredible technical challenges to overcome. But the rule that we set for ourselves is no component level innovation, no new physics, no new chemistry, no new material science. Those are the sexy and the fun problems that people gravitate towards. Instead, we chose the still technical problems, but the boring ones.
Okay, so your intellectual property isn't how to put it all together and transport it to the other side of the world and how much electricity we get from nuclear. My understanding is there's something like 300 or 400 nuclear power plants around the world, and they put out roughly 400 or 500 gigawatts of power. Does that sound right?
This is what is just so incredible about nuclear technology. It's that for so little input, you get so much out of it.
Okay.
And so those 400 buildings around the world provide 10% of world electricity, 4% of all of our energy consumption as a global civilization. That's incredible from 400 buildings. The fact is that any society that has experienced a rapid decarbonization, whether you look at France or Sweden or South Korea or Ontario, anyone that's done a total decarbonization of their energy infrastructure in under a decade's time, it's always been nuclear.
They still rely on coal, especially in Poland and Romania. I think they get the majority of their electricity from coal still. So your initial customer base are people, companies that no longer want to rely on dirty coal power.
The factories that we serve in Poland specifically have two problems. The first is that, yes, their energy that they get is very expensive and very dirty. And the other is actually capacity, because it's not so easy to just string up new transmission lines. And so they want to grow their economy. They want to grow their industry, and they literally cannot get enough power to the factory. So what do? We ship over a bunch of shipping container-sized modules, put it right next to the factory, and we become their utility. Nuclear has yet again another very unique advantage, and it's called distributed baseload. The fact that you can perfectly match your power supply with your power demand, both in location and in time. If a city needs 400 megawatts of power, they can buy 20 of our 20 megawatt units and co-locate that with the city, so you don't even need transmission cabling at all. If they grow in terms of size, they can just add on another unit, so it's always perfectly matched.
And you don't think the citizens of that town should worry about having all those reactors right in the fields right next door?
I think part of the reason that some communities have grown skeptical or scared of nuclear is actually lack of exposure to it. And so by building these beautiful buildings and setting them up outside of town and inviting the community to come visit it, we're going to be changing the perception of nuclear as well.
I hope that's true. Once you've built a dozen of these in Eastern Europe, do you think the NRC might just want to, rubber stamp it and say, this is good for the U.S. too?
I think after we've built a few of these in Eastern Europe, and Western Europe as well, we're going to see interest from around the entire world, and it's going to be a race to see who can get their hands on as many of these as soon as possible.
That'll be a good problem for you to have. Okay, how many of these do you think you could build over the next decade?
Our goal is to completely decarbonize Earth's energy production. Period. We want to make energy abundant and affordable because of the effects that it has for every other industry. I mean, if you think of data centers, or if you think of material production, if you think of all of the modern wonders of life, they all have energy as a root input to them. And so by us making energy cheaper, we're going to help fulfill the visions of every other industry as well. There's certainly some institutional inertia that has slowed down from a bureaucratic perspective the development of new nuclear installations in this country. It applies less to us because we're focused on Europe. And in Europe, we've had a lot of success working with the NRC equivalent regulators. So the ONR out in the UK, Chenecon in Romania, and the PAA in Poland have been great partners in helping us regulate and implement our nuclear technology abroad.
When you're talking tens of thousands of reactors, that seems like an awful lot of material, a lot of uranium and everything else. Is that going to be a limiting factor at all?
One of the beauties about a system as simple as ours, us not moving towards these radical new physics innovations that require new materials, is that our plant is essentially steel, copper, water, and uranium. All of some of the most abundant and available materials, especially in terms of the power production that they end up creating. There's more than enough from a material perspective for us to not only satisfy global energy demand, but for us to 10x it.
For wind turbines and solar panels, they need a lot of exotic materials, rare earth metals and stuff like that. You don't need any of those?
There is a challenge in these systems that require big magnets with some of these more exotic materials, but they also require steel and cement and other things too that are material concerns. The key is with nuclear, you get so much more for so much less input. And so for us to produce that exact same megawatt hour of energy as a renewable system, we'd be using between 100 and 1,000 times less material input.
For the same amount of electricity?
For the same amount of electricity produced. You're looking at a facility right now that can supply energy for 20,000 homes. If you were to think of all the solar panels you'd need, you'd have a great visual representation of just how much more material and land renewables require.
You have some competitors out there. Other companies have spent hundreds of millions of dollars and many more years to try to get through the regulatory process, and they don't really seem to be any further along than you, this guy who only got into the field 4 or 5 years ago. What are they missing? What do you attribute your success to so far? I mean, for sure, you haven't built this yet, but you've made some great progress.
One of our core theses is to always make sure that you're solving the right problem, not the fun one. And so we went around and we interviewed both people from industry, government, scientists, and former startups in the nuclear sector itself. And one thing that we realized was everyone was just so focused on redesigning the reactor. And come on, it's fun, especially if you're a nuclear physicist. That's what you're trained to do, redesign the reactor.
What do you mean, like new kinds of fuel or new configurations?
New fuel, new material science.
Fusion, everyone loves that. Yeah.
So fundamentally new physics as well.
Forbes, of course, we cover the world of billionaires. When it comes to fusion, I'm amazed at how many billionaires want to have a piece of one fusion development or another. It's like it's their pet rock right now. Do you have any billionaire backers yet?
I don't know if I should be speaking to the personal finances of our backers, but we've got an amazing cohort of investors and board members. All of our investors were former entrepreneurs and operators themselves, and yes, they've done extremely well over the years.
So what's 2023 going to hold for Last Energy? What are your milestones to reach this year?
Well, 2022 was incredible, between getting head of state endorsements and selling dozens of units abroad. It was just like a whirlwind year. So now it's time to get to brass tacks, ramp up our manufacturing capabilities, and start actually serving these energy systems.
And your manufacturing is going to initially be done where?
Right here in Texas.
Right here in Texas.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bolt is a ride-hailing company, just like Uber. You can book a taxi through them. Now you can also rent an electric scooter or have your groceries or your takeout order delivered. You can even book a rental car through them. And Bolt is mainly competing with Uber in Africa and in Europe. There are a couple of things that stood out to me about Bolt and Marcus Willig when I started reporting on this story. Marcus was unusually young when he started this company. He was only 19 years old. So what I saw in Marcus Willig and Bolt was something of a sort of David and Goliath story. You have a much smaller startup and a young founder going head to head against a much larger, a much better resourced American rival in the form of Uber. Uber also play very, very tough. We're seeing Marcus and Bolt at times winning despite the odds being stacked against them.
Starting any business is hard, but it's especially hard if you're starting as a 19-year-old kid in a small country like Estonia with very limited experience and funding. So the first months were brutal. I was coding the app myself during the summer. I was going on the streets of Tallinn, signing up taxi drivers one by one. 90% of them immediately said, "Get out of my car, you're just a young kid, what are you going to offer me? It makes no sense." So it was very, very tough. And it was just persistence and very hard work that got us to where we are today.
So Bolt has grown very quickly in recent years and to date has raised $1.8 billion from venture capitalists. At its last rounds, last year, that valued the company at $8.3 billion. But when we look at corporate filings for 2021, we can see that they generated around $570 million in revenue. How does that compare to Lyft or Uber? On a revenue basis, that means that Bolt is around 5 times smaller than Lyft or around 50 times smaller than Uber. Marcus Willig grew up in Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. It's a small European country on the Baltic Sea in northeastern Europe. He founded this business right out of high school. So he had a few entrepreneurial ventures beforehand. He was web designing and he had started a small sort of ed tech app. Kind of quickly realized it'd be very difficult to scale that and sort of started looking around for sort of new ideas, new opportunities. And I think a big inspiration was Skype. Skype was Estonia's kind of pioneering unicorn startup that created a pre-Zoom online video and online call-in software that ended up being acquired by Microsoft. Several of his early investors came through Skype, and his older brother Martin, who helped co-found the business, had also worked at Skype as well.
Estonia actually has an interesting background where, due to the Russian occupation for 50 years, all entrepreneurship was outlawed. So nobody could start the business, and that was the environment I was first growing up in. But also, of course, as soon as the occupation ended and Estonia gained its independence, everybody wanted to start something new. So actually starting a company seemed like a very popular, new, trendy thing to do. And what also happened was there was no other big companies to join because the economy was so new. So it wasn't like you could go and join a large corporation. What many young people exactly wanted to do was start their own business. So it was actually a pretty natural environment for me to grow up wanting to be like that as well.
Marcus talks about having been in to see many of the kind of leading venture capitalists across Europe and beyond, and was met with the same answer: no thank you. Investors were intrigued by him and what he built, but when they were looking at the opportunity of this very young founder from this very small country to build a product that could compete with Uber, which had already raised over $1 billion, investors were not optimistic about his prospects. As a result of that, Marcus had to learn to do things his own way on a very small budget. This meant that Marcus and Bolt had to find new ways to grow and had to find smart solutions to do that and to beat Uber. Some of these examples will be looking at Africa, where Bolt was very quick to offer cash payments. This meant that you could book a taxi through the Bolt app, and instead of making a payment via Apple Pay or with a card, you would hand your driver cash and the driver would settle up with Bolt at the end of the day or at the end of the week. This may sound like a small thing, but around 25% of people in South Africa don't have access to a bank account or credit cards, and that's even higher in other parts of Africa where Bolt operates.
I'd say the hardest part of our journey so far were the first 5 years, because we were barely able to raise any funding at all. We managed to raise about 1 million euros, and we built the company into more than 10 countries with that limited amount of funding, while our competitors were raising more money than any company in the history of technology. So we were completely outspent by all these other players, and the only way we could succeed was by being smarter. So we were really focused on making sure that the team is very focused on frugality, and we count really the impact of every euro that we spend.
It's a common playbook for startups in Europe that as soon as you start to build some traction, you should go to the US, which is the largest possible market. However, Marcus was relying on his own data there. He started looking at the stats and saw that the greatest possible potential was actually in Africa, specifically in South Africa, rather than the US. He also knew that he would face less competition there than he would do where he had to go head-to-head with Uber or Lyft in the US market.
You need to expand only to the cities where you can actually offer something better than the incumbents do. Otherwise, you're just generating no value there. So we realized very early on that Central and Eastern Europe was underserved. Other platforms didn't really understand the local customer as well as we did. And that translated into many things. For example, local payment methods. They didn't work with all the drivers in these markets. They didn't necessarily focus on safety and some other aspects that were important here.
After years of running Bolt on a very tight budget, Marcus was able, in the pandemic, to raise some really large sums of money from investors. That supercharged the growth of Bolt and helped it expand into new areas like scooters, like food delivery, like groceries, and even offering rental cars. That's been really expensive. E-scooters are a tough business though. Investors around the world have invested around $5 billion into startups like Bird, but many of them still don't turn a profit and are aggressively burning money.
Most companies can barely build one product that reaches millions of customers, and even less companies are able to actually build multiple products that ever work really well. So we were always very conscious that we don't want to expand into products that are not centered around our core mission. But with electric scooters, we realized very early on that there's many synergies that we can benefit from by having the leading ride-hailing service in a city and by also having the leading scooter sharing service in a city. Because it's largely the same customers anyway. So we don't need to spend nearly as much money on marketing to acquire those customers, but we can take that money that other companies spend on marketing and actually invest that into having a better product and cheaper prices. Bolt's mission from day one has been that we want to build better cities, and we believe the best way to do that is to replace private cars. So it's never been that we only want to be a ride-hailing company. I don't even have a driver's license. So for me, it was always, how do we expand the product set so we can truly replace the private car? And electric scooters were the next obvious place for us to expand into, because most of the trips in cities are short, and electric scooters are one of the best ways to replace those trips.
Ride-hailing is a tough business. It's hard to make money here with very tight margins. Bolt has got a lot bigger, but the business also burnt through $600 million in 2021. And investors will be watching Marcus's and Bolt's numbers very closely, but also Uber and Lyft, which have still yet to turn an annual profit.
Our mission is to make cities better by replacing private cars. And we think that we're truly at just the very early stages of that. We already have more than 100 million customers across Europe and Africa. But when you look at the potential, then we think there's more than 1 billion people that we can address over these two continents over the next 10 years to come.
On November 27, 2020, Zappos founder Tony Hsieh died from injuries he sustained in a house fire at the age of 46. At the time, David Jeans and Angel Al-Young led coverage for Forbes on the tech mogul's mysterious passing. They uncovered a tragic story of a downward spiral fueled by drugs, mental health issues, and a never-ending search for happiness. An exclusive excerpt of their new book, Wonder Boy, Tony Hsieh, Zappos, and the Myth of Happiness in Silicon Valley, appears in the April 2023 issue of Forbes, in which the authors chronicle the final months of Hsieh's life in Park City, Utah, and the circle of sycophantic friends and family members who milked millions from him.
The book excerpt focuses on a very small window of Tony's life in 2020 when he was in Park City. And this particular episode focused on the friends and people who surrounded himself with, which included family members, it included longtime friends, and it also included people who just entered his life. And what we were trying to document in this particular chapter was how some of those people had entered business agreements with Tony at a time when he was spiraling with drug use.
Essentially, he had spent years living in downtown Vegas, and when COVID-19 hit, he decided to move to Park City for various reasons. We heard a lot of different stories about what he was trying to do in Park City. He was trying to build world peace, he was trying to solve the COVID-19 crisis, but in many ways, it seemed like him going to Park City was just a way for him to run away from the efforts from friends and family to try to get him the help that he needed at that time.
In the moments Hsieh did spend with his family, he left them struggling to connect with him. During one moment with his mother Judy, he said he would be open with her if she would act like his friend. If she acted like a family member, then he would hide information from her. After Judy told him he needed to see a therapist, he said he would, but only if for every minute he was in therapy, she would sit in an ice bath. When she pressed the therapy point once more, mentioning his issues with attention, Tony left the house in a rage.
He bought mansions, a ranch, multiple houses, and essentially told his friends that if you move to Park City, I'll double your most recent W-2.
He started to send the word out far and wide, come and join me here. And the offer was too good to pass up. And often the mandate was just come here and create, build, do something that gives you purpose and helps you find your meaning in life. At first, some people who were old friends of his may have arrived in the city just because they were curious and he was their friend and they were trying to see what it was all about. Once they got there, some people turned around and walked away and left. Other people stayed and continued to draw salary from him and take money from him and into business deals with him. Often, people justified remaining in Park City by saying they were there to help their friend, which sometimes came into conflict with the payments they were receiving from him at the same time. And at the end of the day, it felt like money really muddied that situation.
I think that some of Tony's friends who chose to move to Park City did move because the offer was too great. And you have to remember that this was during the first year of the pandemic. And a lot of people who didn't have 9-to-5 office jobs, they were nervous about job security. And Tony Hsieh was essentially offering them a lifeline during a period of huge uncertainty. So to have somebody like that offer to double your best W-2, I can see a scenario where people would choose to drop everything and move to Park City because of that.
Hsieh had become focused on the study of biohacking to increase his personal output. He became convinced that inhaling nitrous oxide was a way to heighten his blood oxygen levels and eliminate the need for sleep. In between cigarettes, Hsieh was inhaling from whippet canisters like he was drinking water from a bottle. By one estimate, he was using more than 50 a day. His spiral with nitrous oxide came at a time when people were finding new ways to spend his money, and Hsieh seemed all too willing to spend himself broke, thanks to a nonsensical incentive scheme he had devised called 10X.
So 10X actually started as a noble idea, which was Park City was reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was an initiative that he and some of his friends tried to launch to help restaurants in Park City reopen. And the idea was that he would run an open bar tab on Main Street in Park City, and then people in town could spend $10 buying a band that would get you free food and drink at all these really nice restaurants in Park City.
And it went well for a very short period of time, But the state of Utah quickly realized what Tony was doing and shut the program down because you can't legally just run an open bar tab on an entire street in Park City. And so when that business plan fell apart, 10X morphed into something else that Tony started to implement with some of his friends and assistants and associates.
It became an incentive scheme in which Tony would say, if you spend, $1,000 of my money, you'll get 10% of it on top of that. So if you were able to recruit someone and they get a $100,000 salary, then you would get $10,000. If you take your people out to a restaurant, you spend $1,000, you'll get $100 back.
The nature of 10X program obviously stoked a lot of infighting amongst people who were carrying out Tony's business finances and carrying out Tony's wishes. There was one contract in particular that Mimi Pham, who had been Tony's assistant and confidant for over a decade minimum, had fought over with Tony's brother Andy Shea. Tony had this idea to bring Paula Abdul, who he knew from a friendship level, to Park City and basically have her play shows for people to essentially encourage folks to come back to Park City during the pandemic. And the size of the contract would have been $9 million. And whoever buttoned up that contract would have gotten that 10% commission, which meant that $900,000 was on the line.
In total, through an LLC she controlled, Pham sent invoices for what amounted to more than $20 million. In one case, she, quote, managed a contractor who was being paid $83,333.33 a month for, quote, assistance and management of various projects, earning her $8,333 every time he was paid.
As time went on, it became very clear who was profiting from it and who was sort of taking advantage of him, and also who was trying to help. And as we saw, his brother, Andy, arrived in Park City. And Andy initially would tell a lot of friends that he was there to keep an eye on his brother. And also, he figured that he wanted some financial due diligence being done. And that meant that he brought in an old friend of the Shays, whose name was Tony Lee. And he was a renowned financial advisor. And when Tony Lee came in, he started looking at the books and realized pretty quickly that there was a lot of nonsensical transactions occurring. Despite Andy setting up like a safety net and trying to do right by him, Andy did end up taking a $1 million salary from his brother. He also ended up spending and trying to spend more of his money and setting aside millions and millions of dollars, which was disrupted by other people who were living with Tony at the time.
Unfortunately, the people that I remember the most in reporting the story out are folks who spoke to me anonymously. And I'm so grateful to them for trusting me with their story and trusting that I won't ever break that trust. But in terms of the people who spoke to me on the record, I think one person that really jumps out at me is a woman named Michelle D'Attilio. She was a woman who met Tony years and years before and actually dated him and ended up working with him and working for him. And she just had a really unique perspective of Tony, and she understood Tony in a way that most people didn't. Michelle was present for a lot of the events that happened in 2020, and there was one anecdote that she shared where she and Tony were having a conversation on the front steps of one of the properties in Park City. And Tony Shea basically told Michelle, I'm thinking about stepping down as CEO of Zappos. And at the time, Michelle wasn't sure whether he was getting pressure from Zappos executives or if he just didn't want to do the job anymore. And she told me how she looked at him in the eyes and saw how thin he was and saw how gaunt he was and just how tired he looked, how tired one of her longest friends looked. She said to him at that moment, you've done so much for other people, you just need to take care of yourself now.
He always felt from a very young age that he never quite fit in, whether it was racially, socially, economically. He was a genius level intellect, and he was always trying to make sure that he wasn't seen as the genius. He wanted to be seen as the normal person, and he was always just trying to strive for the normal person who we all are.
Tony was somebody who was singularly obsessed with finding happiness for himself. And In many ways, for Tony, that seemed to mean adding things to his life. Whether that meant building a community for his friends in the form of putting $350 million into revitalizing downtown projects or building businesses. It was always about adding something to his life. What's so tragic about Tony's story is that if you ask his friends, his colleagues, his family, they'll tell you that Tony was more than enough, but he just didn't realize that. If there was one takeaway that I would want readers to take from it, is to just take stock of what you have and understand that it's not about adding more to your life. It's just realizing what is and being okay with it.
I think one thing about technology is that there's this idea that sort of culture is separate from technology, and that people are separate from technology, and that these things are on two sides of a line. I think that's really not only incorrect, but it's often damaging. Technology is to further humanity, full stop. I started Kindred Ventures in 2014 as a solo capitalist, and one of the first investments that I made from that was Coinbase. I had come from consumer software and the consumer internet, and I learned a ton about how to build these much more heavyweight industries like marketplaces and logistics. Moving forward, I started angel investing more and more. I had not only invested in 30 or 40 startups by that time, but I had also learned so much about how to help startups, how to help founders as another founder, as a fellow founder. And I really enjoyed that 0 to 1 stage, that going from one or two people and coming up with a concept that they were very excited about, and then being able to help them, not only as an angel investor with some capital, but also as someone who can empathize with their experience. At this time period, this is when there was sort of a shift in thinking about founders and operators being investors might be a good thing. And that seems sort of obvious today, but back then it was unclear. San Francisco and Silicon Valley and California, this progressive mentality that it harbors has been a great driver. This is why people from around the world come here, because they know that they're in a place that embraces them. We can't lose that in California, and we certainly can't lose that in San Francisco.
Our company is called Humane. We are about 220 people now, based in San Francisco, and we've been building since 2019 on the belief that AI will be the base of the next generation of compute. And we knew back then that we felt that there needed to be an entirely new device and an entirely new platform to allow for the mass consumer to really be able to experience it and become superpowered by AI.
I think the thing that really attracted us to Steve was his approach to building companies is similar to the way we build product. We have a philosophy that really starts with what the experience of the product should actually be, and we work our way back from that.
He gives very direct and open and honest feedback and guidance and advice, and sometimes in the moment I'll walk away thinking, I wonder why he's thinking that, and then later realize that he has the long view. He's thinking, what does this mean for Humane 10 years out, 20 years out?
It's hard for a lot of people to articulate what exactly they're looking for, but it's up to founders to build that. It's just been a pleasure to back teams like that, and we want every investment to feel like they're not just following what the future may hold, but actually helping create and shape what that future might look like. A friend of mine had moved from Canada to San Francisco, and his name was Garrett Camp, and he had an idea about a black car with a driver being able to pick you up based upon you requesting it on your phone. And this app idea was a side project, and he asked me one day to help him work on it. And so I helped him start the company as an advisor. So it was called Uber Cab in the very beginning. Those early days was so important to later on how I sort of built a framework for myself on how startups can come from many different origin points. I feel grateful to have been a very small part of that journey in the beginning and to be able to stay close to the company. But I'm mainly in awe of the startup journey and that it can result in a company like this. It's still a pleasure to see the company grow as a global service under the new management. And I think Dara and team here have done an amazing job of continuing the growth. One of the things that I really loved about moving to San Francisco was the art, the music, the food culture, all of that. And it wasn't just for wealthy people. It was for people, entrepreneurs and creative folks that wanted to do something differently and wanted to be the best at what they were doing. And so one of the things that I've tried to do is support the arts here. I think it's really important. I've backed restaurants, local street artists, music venues. I think part of what we do in venture is to pay it forward to new founders, to help them build out their vision. I also think we should be doing that with our community. Tosca is a place to convene people. We brought the CEO of Gucci and the Caring Group management team here to talk about Web3 technology, and they loved it. And that's a very San Francisco thing, to take a craft, take that attention to detail, take inspiration from everyone else out there, and from their own lives, wherever they came from. So it just got into my head that, hey, we enjoy all these things. They're entrepreneurs too. We are investing in each other so that we can improve our community's life. San Francisco is going through its problems, as any big city is today. But, I think the best thing that we have for each other is a smaller, tight-knit community. We can invest in each other through thick and thin. One of my old startups a long time ago, I used to go to this restaurant next door, and people would frequently come by and tap me on the shoulder on their way out and say, really love the food tonight, thank you so much. I was kind of confused, and the manager told me that, hey, I think it's because the chef looks like you, the chef de cuisine, the CDC. And I laughed, I said, you gotta introduce me to him. His name's Brandon Zhu. He's born and raised in San Francisco, Chinese American, and an amazing fine dining chef, but really wanted to break out on his own and start his own restaurant. And at that time, there was not much happening in Chinatown. So he was really the first. And he helped revitalize it by creating Mr. Zhu's, which is both a restaurant, a lounge, a banquet hall for the community, and a bakery shop and a cafe, all in one. Where we are right now is the very first Blue Bottle Cafe. It's really just a garage and a cart. And it's the very first one. I think it opened in 2004. And I lived up the street. It really opened my eyes up to the idea of third wave coffee. This new sort of more thoughtful in terms of where the beans were roasted and how the beans were roasted and where the beans were sourced and things of that nature. So I was able to invest early with them. And that's been a great experience. As an investment in not only what they provide to the city and our community, it's somewhere that I can go to in Tokyo now, in Seoul, and London, and New York, and LA, and that's been an amazing journey to watch. I ended up being able to help them enter and expand into Japan and Korea, which was really exciting and fun. My family is originally from Korea with also some roots in Japan. And so it was really fun to help them launch in Tokyo and Seoul and enjoy that. I think it's putting our industry to task to say, don't just complain, don't just give us your wish list, but support creators, entrepreneurs, artists, builders, real builders, like atomic builders, right? Designers, restaurants, chefs. Be able to support them in the community that you choose to be in.
Steve does this for love. In fact, I bet Steve would pay to do this. That's how much he loves it. And when I say it, I mean just working with founders. He loves rolling up his sleeves and getting into the muck and really trying to help early teams figure stuff out. And so as a result, his passion and his enthusiasm is pretty authentic, and it's very organic. And that really resonates with me because we can sustain ourselves through hard times when you're doing it for love. And then the second, I guess, is he's been doing this a long time, and so he is, I always refer to him as like a Marco Polo of startups. He's tried every spice, and so as a result, he can bring some real wisdom to bear on behalf of startups across different areas of technology.
Every conversation that we have with Steve is always so inspired, energized, and always so helpful. In these early days when we actually started to build a company, and it was just a small crew, even now, he's been a big part of our Series C as well. He's just got such a really precise vision of how to execute alongside founders. There's really just no other way to describe it.
We're grateful to be involved when they're ultimately successful. And we're also grateful to them if they're not successful and they have to shut their company down, because we've also learned so much along the way. We're just fired up to be able to have that relationship for the long haul, from starting the company all the way to, hopefully after IPO. But even if not IPO, if the company doesn't work out and they start a new company, we want to, again, be their ally and help them on that journey. So this is a lifelong commitment that we're making to our founders. It's a true partnership, and this is really why, we named the fund Kindred Ventures. How do we understand the psychology of our founders so that we're not sort of one size fits all in our approach? How do we understand the type of product or technology they're working with? How do we play the right role, right? And have that great investor and founder fit that we're looking for. So these are the things that we can control. These are the things that matter to us. The rest is up to the founder.
Vanta is a company that basically automates other companies' security and compliance processes. So the security part is like making sure a company is managing and storing customer data in a way that's safe.
So a lot of the software we use, right, has all this customer data, it knows so much about us. And we sort of found that when, that there's a data breach or there's a security hack, right, and that data is everywhere, it has real consequences for people. Right? If you think about Equifax or Target or these big breaches. And so there's just so much scrutiny on whether companies are kind of doing the right thing and securing the customer data they have. And there's kind of rightly a lot of scrutiny on that.
The notable thing about Vanta's investment strategy was Christina, the founder and CEO, worked in venture as her first institutional job out of college, basically. And from that, there are two, lessons that she likes to talk about. One is that companies are the best at raising money when they don't need it, and the other is that it's easy to confuse fundraising success with company product success. And I think she's been really conscious about trying not to fall into those traps. Christina actually waited until Vanta reached 10 million in annual recurring revenue, which is the way Vanta measures revenue because it's a subscription-based company, to raise its first big institutional funding round at Series A. Most companies usually try to raise a Series A when it's 1 million at that metric, so Vanta waited until much later. So that was in May of 2021. They raised 50 million in a Series A led by Sequoia. And then a year later, they announced the Series B in June of 2022. It was an 110 million round led by Craft Ventures, and that round valued the company at $1.6 billion.
So when Vanta launched in 2018, we launched this category of automated compliance, so helping companies get compliant and secure quickly. Since then, we've grown with our customers and now offer a broader trust management platform, but still staying core to helping technology companies secure the customer data they have, and then go demonstrate and prove that they're, have reasonable security to their customers so they can go grow their business. When I was a product manager at Dropbox trying to take a new product to market, and we were really excited about giving the product to, big companies, enterprise customers, and then, the legal team kind of correctly told us we couldn't do that. We couldn't show that the product was secure and compliant. We thought we had reasonable practices, but we couldn't demonstrate them in the way these enterprises expected. And I didn't know anything about the space, but as more and more I learned, the process itself, or the goal, made sense, right? It's like, of course, we should show we're trustworthy to big customers and do the right thing. But what that scrutiny ends up meaning is these companies have to, one, have reasonable practices, and two, then go through these pretty onerous processes to prove they have good security practices, right? And they're actually securing the data. And historically, that was like spreadsheets and manual audits, and like everything was one-off, which both took a ton of time and effort, and also was like pretty inefficient because we were like talking about software and we're taking it into, pieces of paper almost literally. But companies would still go through it because it was so important to them to show that they were good stewards of customer data, and their customers wanted that, almost before they'd make the purchase, right? So it was like such an important thing to prove, and felt, kind of a large problem and an important one to solve, because as someone who builds software, I actually still believe in the transformative power of software, but, we can't do that if we don't trust it. I think in the beginning, because we created the category, because we created the product, we didn't have software competition. We truly were the only thing. And so the trick in the kind of sales or go-to-market processes was convincing someone they could rely on software for something they had a bunch of manual processes before. As kind of 2020 and 2021 went on and just more startups got funded, there were more entrants into the space. People sort of copied what we did, took it to market. And I think that just, breeds some amount of resilience. It deeply shows that in software, you're sort of only as good as your last release in a lot of ways. And you may have created the category and brought this new product to market and done this innovation, but if that happened 2 years ago, right, it's much more about, well, what are you doing this quarter, next quarter? How are you continuing to show that you're useful to customers and not sort of resting on the laurels of a prior success? I think waiting until we were 10 million in ARR to raise our Series A instilled a lot of discipline in the company. It forced us to think about, are we doing the right thing? Do we have a good business? Not, does some VC think we have a good business, right? It kind of made it more insular in a helpful way there. I also think it forced some discipline around practices, like we charge customers annually up front, and these like cash flow things that actually helped us not need funding for longer. And in those ways, those sort of smaller decisions helped us build a stronger, more resilient business. And I think finally the answer was like, we didn't need the cash. And again, some of it was things like charging annually up front, but we certainly had problems to solve, but they weren't problems where it felt like it was, more money would solve them. It felt like more money actually might make it more complicated or raise the stakes or do other things. And so, why don't we solve those problems first? And then when we get to the problems where it seems like money can solve them, go pursue investment.
Two things came across really clearly when I was talking to Christina and like her former and current business partners and investors. One is that she's like super scrappy and really prioritizes like product over ego. Like when I was asking her, was Vanta the category creator? She was like visibly uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to like claim credit for this kind of thing. And that's definitely something that carries into like how she runs a business. The other thing is that she's like clearly someone who like will learn anything for the sake of learning it.
So prior to Vanta, I worked at an early stage investment firm, like VC firm in New York, Union Square Ventures. I think working at the early stage VC firm and interacting with like seed stage founders, I very much wanted to be one of them and start a company. I didn't quite know in what yet. I got into Beanie Babies when I was like in 4th grade because my mom's family lived in Chicago and they found out about them a little earlier than everyone else. And collected Beanie Babies, still have hundreds of them in my mom's basement, much to her chagrin, and then got to like buying and selling them on eBay, like early eBay, and putting them together in different like groupings and trying to sell them that way, and riding my bike to Kroger, just like the local grocery store, to get money orders, because this was before there were many credit cards in the internet, and I definitely didn't have a credit card at this stage. So I'd like go to Kroger and like slide quarters across the counter and get a money order basically to go pay for them. I think one thing from when I was a kid to now is kind of a deep curiosity, and I really do like to learn things for the sake of learning things, sometimes to a fault. As a college student, it meant I changed my major like 12 times. I like couldn't really settle on something. So there's definitely too much, but I think in this role, it's been really helpful because for the first couple years of a quickly growing company, you're sort of doing all of the different roles in a company until you can sort of do them well enough to convince someone who is much more experienced and much better than you to come in and do it better than you were. And going into each of those new roles and being like, well, you know, I didn't know what customer success is, but I'm going to go talk to the people and do the things and learn about it. And figuring out how to have joy in that versus just feeling like it's another hill to climb. I think that curiosity piece has been helpful.
So Imad Mustak is the founder and CEO of the AI startup Stability AI. He launched the company back in 2019, and he went through a couple different business ideas for it. None of them really ended up generating much revenue, if any, and eventually Imad just kept going, kept searching for a business that would work. It was summer 2022 that Stability really broke out, had its big sort of almost overnight viral moment. And this came with the launch of the generative AI text-to-image generator called Stable Diffusion. This is a model which allows you to type in a phrase, anything from your imagination, and can generate almost instantly an AI-generated image. I interviewed him 3 times, once in San Francisco last October when Stability had its public launch party, and then again in January in San Francisco, and then in London. I think I picked up pretty early on that he's a very charming and charismatic guy, and he talks a very large game, I think, compared to most Silicon Valley founders. He has high ambitions and is very open about sharing them. And I think that's really inspired a lot of people, both investors and collaborators, but also, you know, his own employees and just the general public that has gravitated towards AI. So he's developed a bit of a cult following, I think, in a sense, through that. During the fact-checking process, we found that a lot of things that he said were just very difficult to fact-check. So I think this was kind of the first, maybe not red flag, but yellow flag that set things off and made us start to have some skepticism and want to look further into the claims that he was making. As we dug in further, started talking to investors who had met with Stability, started talking to former employees. We started to piece together more of the facts. We started to gather some documents. Imad has, at least since 2017, been claiming that he holds a master's degree from Oxford University in math and computer science. He had this on his LinkedIn at the time that Stability raised their $100 million last summer. That LinkedIn has since been deleted, but we found further traces of that dating back to, you know, his past companies, going back to 2017, where he claimed this Oxford degree. But in reality, we contacted Oxford, and Oxford told us that He does not hold a master's degree, he only holds a bachelor's degree. I think one of the big unlocks was we got a fundraising pitch deck from summer 2022 that had a list of, I think, about like 50 employees on there in one of the slides of the document. And what I found was that there were many people that were listed on that slide that did not have stability on their LinkedIn, did not have any like publicly searchable connection to stability, but they were on this document. And one of the people was this person named Eric Hallahan, who went on the record and talked to us about his experiences at the company. Eric had been an intern at the company. He spoke through the chaos of the company a bit. He had been slated to work 300 hours with the company over last summer, and ultimately 181 of the hours he sent an invoice to Stability in August. And 8 months later, he had not heard back. He had not been paid for it. I contacted Stability's collaborators that on Stable Diffusion, their image generator, and I ended up getting in touch with the professor at the German university called Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich, and turns out that this professor had overseen the initial research to create the AI model that served as the basis for Stable Diffusion. He had a lot of gripes about the way that Stability had marketed itself and positioned itself as being, they had said in public marketing materials, the company behind Stable Diffusion. As this professor told me, Stability would sometimes take an outsized amount of credit for, being the company behind this work, and then sometimes it was only after he had reached out to the company that the company dialed it back or, gave the university some credit. One thing that was really memorable to me that he had said during the call was that if you have a large enough press department, then you can rebrand history in your interests. And got the impression that that's exactly how he felt about what Stability had done. So we also got our hands on fundraising pitch decks. So these are like PowerPoint presentations, essentially, that the company presents to investors that they hope to put money into the company. It claimed that it had partnerships with organizations including the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Health Organization. They claimed a partnership with Amazon Web Services that in these slide decks they described as a quote-unquote strategic partnership. They claimed that Amazon had supplied a vast amount of AI chips at a 80% discount to the market value. When I talked to Imad in January, he told me that Amazon had cut Stability a very attractive deal that he said came with quote-unquote certain personal guarantees. When I asked him for more information about this, I was sitting in the room with him as well as his wife, Zara Qureshi, who was the company's head of PR at the time. She shot my question down and they just would not go further on that conversation point until we changed the topic. We spoke to a vice president at Amazon who said Stability is in fact like any other Amazon customer when it comes to cloud computing, and he shot down the notion that there was a strategic partnership. It was unclear what exactly the arrangement was, and until we finally found a couple sources who were able to independently verify, it turns out that Stability actually was millions of dollars in debt to Amazon, and that the strategic partnership that Imad had claimed was not really a special deal for Stability. To investors, he had said that Stability had as much as an 80% discount on AI chips from Amazon through this partnership. But after reaching out to Stability for comment, they told us that this 80% discount is actually a standard discount that Amazon offers to anybody who wants to be its customer. With a story like this, you always want to reach out to the company to give them a chance to respond to everything that you plan to say about them in the story. So we reached out to them in early May. They responded to a lot of our questions, but pushed back on certain things. But I think more unusually, a key element of our story is not just Imad, the founder, but that his wife, Zara Qureshi, who was the head of PR. She also had claimed on business cards that she was the chief operating officer, and we found that she was sitting on the company's board of directors after they obtained their $100 million of VC funding. Imad took to Twitter, and he also wrote a blog post addressing some of the claims that we had made in the story. I think Stability has had some kind of skepticism from a certain portion of the AI community, I think even prior to us publishing this story. Some of the feedback we've gotten afterwards is just people being glad that this story is out there with concrete facts rather than being limited to hearsay and back channel. I think it really speaks to what's going on in AI right now because of how popular generative AI has been. Investors out here are just flocking to fund companies at very lofty valuations, throwing around tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. Historically, Silicon Valley investors have spent weeks, if not months, doing due diligence and researching a company and researching the founder and ensuring that there are no red flags and they're comfortable to invest. I think the big question will be, with AI being as hypey as it is now, how mindful will investors be of performing due diligence, of taking a bit more time to check for potential red flags at a company before going in on an investment?
As corporations move more of their apps and data to the cloud amid an AI boom, creating a market expected to reach $1 trillion, the need to properly secure those assets is only becoming more important and challenging. This is where cloud security startup Wiz comes in. Wiz connects to storage providers like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure to scan everything a business is exposing to the outside world, flagging and prioritizing security risks. Picture the doors and windows in an office. Hundreds of doors and thousands of windows. Are they all properly locked? Wiz's security graph would tell the company the 4 or 5 at highest risk, say the windows facing a fire escape, and give tips on how to fix the vulnerabilities. One of our Forbes Cloud 100 list biggest movers this year, soaring 67 spots to number 15, Wiz is arguably tech's highest flying unicorn, at least the highest flying not directly in the AI model race. It was the fastest software company ever to reach $100 million in annual recurring revenue, and then doubled that in just 9 months. And it reached a $10 billion valuation in just 3 years, making its founders new billionaires. But critics say Wiz runs a hyper-aggressive strategy of raising and hiring big, and spending even bigger, with the sharp-elbowed sales tactics to match, that recalls the profligate tech spending of a bubble that's long since burst. So as it helps some of the world's big corporations like LVMH and Morgan Stanley catch this crazy cloud wave, all eyes are on Wiz and its CEO, Asaf Rappaport. First, tell me, how long have you been working on Wiz? Where was it founded? What's the origin story?
So actually we started March 2020. And if you remember, March 2020 was like when COVID hit. Like that basically when we understood that COVID is like a true pandemic. It didn't feel like the right timing to start a startup, not in security, not at all. But probably that was the perfect timing for a cybersecurity company doing cloud security.
And when someone who doesn't know anything about technology security is thinking about the different areas that could be under attack that need security, what kind of information or work is going into the cloud that would need to be protected?
Everything, think about it. Think about organization. Almost everything new that they're doing, they would build it already in the cloud, in the new technology stack. Even look at AI. Like AI is definitely going to be revolutionary, but it's also a cloud revolutionary in a way if you think about it. And everything new is building there. So definitely, if you look at the cloud today, it's probably 10%. That's kind of what we're estimating as the penetration of the cloud, but it's still like this is the most advanced and the new stuff that are going, like all the applications, everything that basically we're doing today has a cloud attachment in a way.
And so you split time between New York and Tel Aviv, and that's kind of similar to the company has hubs in different places, right?
I'm based in New York, but we have a large R&D center in Tel Aviv. That's where we started the company. We have offices nowadays also in Washington, in Denver, in Austin, and we're growing. We're trying to grow also outside of the US to EMEA and APAC. Yeah, we're in one way, we're still a toddler in a way and still growing.
Okay, and this is not your first startup. Can you tell me a little bit about what you did before, and I believe it was with the same crew of co-founders, give or take, as this one.
So we actually met in the 8200 unit. The 8200 unit is kind of the Israeli NSA. So in Israel, we have a mandatory service. That's where we're probably one of the people that can say, hey, we didn't choose to work for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity chose us in a way. So we got drafted to that, and that's how we met. And since then, we're working together. So we've been together in 8200. That's where we learned everything about cybersecurity. After that, we founded together Adalom, which was a player in the CASB market, which is more of like cloud applications security. It was a short run, a very fun one. 2.5 years, got acquired by Microsoft. Came to Microsoft, spent there 5 years, more than expected in a way. We found out that Microsoft is a great place also for entrepreneurs, like to study and to learn how to scale. That's where we led basically the cloud security group. So everything that is cloud security for Microsoft, we had the opportunity to lead this business in a way from almost zero to billions of dollars in ARR, which was truly amazing. It's kind of the golden era of Microsoft, and we learned a ton. And then March 2020 back then it sounded like, hey, great timing, to leave the mothership and to start a new company.
Did this feel like a big acquisition and a big win at the time when you sold the business?
Definitely. It was, it was personally a big win, but also kind of for our ecosystem. And going back to Israel, one of the things that Microsoft did with the acquisition, they acquired something like 7 startups in Israel doing cybersecurity, and that's the way Microsoft kind of leapfrogged to the amazing business that they have today in cybersecurity. So I think it's a great case study about how company get into a new market, doing some acquisition, and becoming a leader of that market.
Times have changed, right? And what seemed big back then would not seem big necessarily, at least to you today, right? So how does the size that we're talking about with the Adalom acquisition compare to now the approach and what you're building with Wiz?
Unlike first-timer, you're like, what's the journey going to look like in a way. It's not like, hey, as you see in the movies, I'm going to be a startup or stuff like that. It's going to be like a bumpy road and a very stressful one. So going back a second time, it's truly was a decision that we needed to make. Like, hey, are we going to do that again? But definitely when we made the decision, we knew we were going to do something different. We don't want to do like, hey, let's do another quick round, an acquisition, get acquired by amazing companies that are out there. We thought, hey, this time we want to take it all the way, like to build Microsoft, to build what we learned from Microsoft, all about the scale, what we knew from Adalom, a lot about like the startup way and how to be nimble and agile, to put this together, and that's kind of for us. This is Wiz.
So you get bought by Microsoft. You talk to Satya Nadella. What does he tell you, and sort of what do you learn from him?
One of the things that Satya did tell me in the first meeting was, I'm here to set the rule, and you're here to break the rules. And this is super inspirational in a way. Think about it, a CEO that is truly a lot about management and manage one of the largest organizations in the world, and hear like how much confidence he has like in companies, in the acquired companies. He said like, I'm here to, not to teach you what Microsoft should do, but I'm here to learn what Adilum can teach us in Microsoft. So that's kind of, the learn it all mentality. I was amazed. Like that gave me truly energy for the next, to the next round.
So with Wiz, what was the first step? Was it to bring together your co-founders who you work with for a long time and say, hey, let's start something new? Or how does it start?
When we started the company, we weren't named Wiz. Our name was Beyond Networks. We were thinking about doing network security in the cloud, something that is very, very advanced. But definitely we started with the people we were customer obsessed. We talked to so many customers. And first of all, we understood that, hey, this is a great idea, like what we're thinking about, like doing in network security in the cloud, but it's too futuristic. Actually, what we were, I would say, was surprised to find out that the problem that we thought is already solved, organizations are struggling, are not able to operationalize what they try to build. They have so many tools in their cloud, doing cloud security, but they're not getting any results from that. And that's kind of wowed us, and we're like, okay, we truly understand the problem. Let's jump into that.
This business has grown pretty fast, right? Can you give us any sense of sort of how fast from your perspective, and was this something that you anticipated or planned for?
I think nobody planned, like, one of the things that we got to $100 million after 18 months. We then crossed another the $200 million and still growing super, super fast. So nobody's planning like, hey, I'm going to do that. So it wasn't our mindset. Having said that, we had the agility, like hey, when we see things are working, we're building more and we're scaling. We had the right funds. We had the right investors, by the way, as well, to support us. And also, I must admit that being a second timer helps in a way that, because you know how to navigate, you know some of the things that you're going to struggle with. So it gives you some of the experience and enable you to be, I would say, more bold in your decision versus a first timer. But that's maybe only me. But that's kind of what helped us to navigate and take the tailwind and run with that.
What would you say your reputation is today? At a $10 billion valuation, obviously super fast-growing revenue, is Wiz still a challenger? Is it now big enough that people are chasing you? How does it feel?
I never feel like big enough. Like, in a way, I still feel like, hey, lots of things ahead of us. I think that in a way we're a startup that is only 3 years old in many, many aspects, but also business-wise grew like at 10 years old or even sometimes 15 years old. So it's I kind of like this ambiguity in a way that you're still a startup, still even super small even to the revenues that we have, but at the same time, you're facing the biggest problems of the world and tackling and beating the biggest giants in the security space.
You think you can grow so fast without having sharp elbows and kind of upsetting some people? Because talking to third parties, some people think that Wiz has a reputation for being a little cutthroat, a little aggressive in sales, not so nice. Which again, it's business, so you could argue that's totally fine. But I am curious if that's something that you think about or you think even matters in kind of that pursuit of market share.
Of course it matters, and I'll tell you, I'm sure that we've done so many mistakes in the way. So definitely, maybe we sometimes mistreated someone and stuff like that. So I'm apologizing for that, and this is an opportunity for us to learn. So definitely this is part of that. But as a company, I don't think this is the culture. It's very, very, very different than what you described.
In visiting your offices in Tel Aviv and talking to people around you, one thing that seems to stand out about Wiz is that you have taken a stance on social issues and sort of wanted to have an impact outside of Wiz while still building the company. Sometimes we see business leaders do that more after their business, but not necessarily at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about where that comes from and sort of what your focuses are?
I think that what we're seeing more in the US, that like the involvement of companies, this wasn't exist in Israel. And I think that bringing that hey, companies can take a stand and companies see themselves as part of the society that they actually part of, this is important. And I think that eventually, it's not about me, it's not about even the company, it's about the people that are in the company, that they care. It's their friends, it's their family, it's where they live. That's why it's so important. It's not something I can say, hey, forget about. Work on what you're doing, forget about your friends, forget about your family or your neighborhood. It's here and now. So that's why, you need to be part of that, and you cannot disconnect. And that's kind of the view that we have. One of the privilege I had, like, as the first timer was like, hey, to move to San Francisco for the first time, living there. I remember, going to the Pride Parade in SF, and I was shocked. I saw all these companies like parading, like, from United to Salesforce to every company that you can basically, the big banks, the insurance company. I'm like, none of that happened in Israel ever. When you went back then to the Israeli parade, it would be, sorry for that, it would be condom companies, it would be, clothing companies and beers. That's that's the sponsors for the parade. And seeing that, one of the first things that when I started in Microsoft, one of the first things that we've done, we did a float of Microsoft with all these companies that I just described and Microsoft as part of that. And that started to change. And by the way, like last parade in Israel, you're seeing TikTok and eBay, and you're seeing part of the change. And I think that's super important.
You've also caused a little bit of controversy, or at least made waves already with Wiz, right? There was something you did a few months ago, I think, with your funding that at least was big news in Israel. Could you share that with our audience as well?
It's never boring in Israel. So one of the things that we're facing today is more about what's the future of Israel as democracy, the judiciary, is it going to be independent? So lots of things like that. One of the things that was very important for us, and by the way, also for our investors, to be fair, is making sure that we're keeping our company safe. And it's a much more risk being in Israel nowadays. And one of the things that we decided not to bring like the new funds that we raised and to keep it outside of Israel until we are getting more certainty about where Israel is facing. It's super sad for Israeli to say, hey, we're going to hold and we're going to look what's going to happen. But truly, this is one of the biggest risks, in my mind, at least, on the Israeli tech scene, on the cyber nation, in a way that we've built. Like, if we're not be able to keep our judiciary independent and continue being a democracy.
When you think about Wiz in the future, what gets you, excited to go to work?
I think when you look at the cloud security market and the potential of that, it's one of the biggest markets going to be in security. And the race is still open in a way. Unlike endpoint security, where there might be a clear leader, and network security, there might be a clear leader. Cloud security going to be probably bigger than those two. And the opportunity is still open. So definitely that's excites me, when you think about racing and making sure that we are becoming kind of the undisputable market leader of the cloud security opportunity. That's huge. The opportunity to build a $100 billion company from cloud security, that's what's on stake today for all of us. And I think that, when you look at Wiz, when you look at the people, at the team that we've built, at the investors that we have, at the customers that we won their trust, I think we had like kind of the best hand in the table, maybe to win this challenge.
So what is winning for you? When do you declare victory?
Yeah, so building a big company. I think that's what we're trying to be.
But it's already a big company, right?
We can be bigger, but IPO is part of that. Every entrepreneur has the dream one day to go public. But we need to remember, this is like a milestone. This cannot be the goal. This is another funding event. A different funding event than what we're used to. We're going to have that, but the journey is much bigger than, hey, going to IPO. Never put a milestone as your end goal.
Launching an agricultural equipment company is tough. It's capital intensive, and cash-strapped farmers tend to be a conservative lot. But California-based Monarch, which has raised $116 million in equity from investors and reached a valuation of $271 million in November 2021 at its latest equity funding, seems to have hit a tipping point. Last year, it booked $22 million in revenue, up from just $5 million in 2021. This year, co-founder and CEO Praveed Penmetsa expects revenue to increase 3- to 5-fold. As it expands, he expects that more of its revenue will come from software subscriptions, which cost up to $8,376 per tractor per year. The software gives farmers real-time alerts about things like sick plants and safety risks, and it gathers and crunches a ton of data to improve crop yields. Those numbers helped Monarch make the cut for this year's Forbes Next Billion-Dollar Startups list, our annual showcase of the 25 companies we think most likely to reach a $1 billion valuation.
every farmer around the world is under tremendous pressure because of lack of labor. With this labor shortage, they're also being asked to do more because a transition to sustainable regenerative farm practices requires farmers to do more operations in the field. Instead of spraying once with dangerous chemicals, they have to do more mechanical operations like mowing or weeding. That is going to cost them more in diesel, more in labor, which is what is holding that transition back. So that's the second big challenge that farmers are facing. The third big one is people asking for data from the farm, whether it's regulatory agencies, certifying agencies that are looking to certify organic sustainable practices, or even consumers like you and me wanting to know more about how this fruit or vegetable that I bought was farmed. All of this means that now the farmer has to go and collect data on the farm at a time when there's no labor, and collecting data is going to result in more emissions from diesel equipment.
Monarch targets vineyards and fruit and vegetable farms for its tractors. These require smaller machines than the giant ones used by those who raise corn or soybeans.
We are the only all-electric, smart, driver-optional tractor in the world that farmers can buy today. And the fact that it's all-electric really helps the farmers out in reducing their fuel costs. It also helps us in reducing emissions that comes from farming.
The way we view the system is kind of three main elements. So there's a fully electrified and by-wire platform. In some sense, it's actually the lower half of the tractor is fully electric and fully by-wire controlled. So that means that we have electronic control over everything that the tractor does. We are enabled to learn what a human operator, a skilled human tractor driver, is doing because we see all the inputs that they are putting into the system when they are doing a specific operation out on the farm. And that knowledge then we can feed up into the autonomy system to say, this is how your skilled human operator ran a mowing operation or ran a spraying operation. And that information now we can encode and start to learn from, so that some of the artificial intelligence is really learning what the human operators are doing and then applying that to allow the system to recreate those same operations but in a fully autonomous fashion. So the base platform is electrified and fully by-wire controlled, and then that connects to the roof, or kind of the top half of the tractor. And in the roof we have all of our computation and communication and sensors, the understanding of what the system is doing and all of the heavy computation to decide what to do with the tractor, where to go, how to stay centered in a row, turning around at the end of a row, all of that detail, how to get from point A to point B, how to do an operation correctly, all of that is encoded in the roof and in the software that's running at the edge in the roof. The third layer in the system is the digital elements of the system, or the cloud-based elements of the system. That data from one tractor in a fleet is reported up to the cloud. Lessons that we learn from one tractor from watching one driver, we can learn that lesson, transmit it up to the cloud, and then reapply that lesson across the entirety of our fleet.
The big, I think, huge opportunity is this autonomy feature. We as farmers, every single day during the growing season, when there's fungal pressure, which there is in every farm region around the world, we have to put on hazmat suits and to spray chemicals to deal with fungal pathogens. And even with organic contact sprays, right, you still have to wear a mask and all this. Just with a safe day by day, everything going smoothly, you're exposing yourself a lot. Then there's also the dangers of terrain and things that could happen. So by being able to automate farming, we're removing the operator from the most dangerous place on the farm, and we're elevating them into a much happier, healthier, cleaner, safer lifestyle. So data is massively important. There's a great McKinsey and Company study that has come out and said that by 2050, farms will be 70% more productive because of data. So it's reactionary. It's the ability to implement changes, like if you have disease pressure in a part of your vineyard or part of your farm, your orchard, you can catch that earlier and hopefully mitigate a plant from potentially having to be replaced to actually just having to make a couple cuts and you're fine, that plant will survive. The greater data that we can get, the more productive we can be as farmers.
The farm owner now is seeing the big picture view, and they are seeing, okay, I've offset, this many kilograms of CO2, I have these 5 issues in my field that have been automatically identified. You know, I'm seeing the beginning of a pest or of a fungus or something. I'm starting to see the beginning of that because that data is starting to be reported back. So kind of at all 3 of those levels, at the operator, at the kind of farm manager, and at the farm owner, the insights that the system is providing are enabling all 3 of those people to do their jobs better and to basically spend less time to get more work done.
What we are seeing with our farm customers is for the first time in agriculture as well. A lot of them have purchased multiple tractors. Some of them have bought 10, 17 tractors at a time in their first year. That tells us 2 things. The fact that they're willing to buy a number of tractors in the first year of production tells us that their challenges are real and huge. But number 2, they're also looking at a tractor as a solution for some of these challenges. And the fact that we can actually address these challenges for them, I think, is the game changer. So we're essentially creating new revenue streams for the farmer in this new world of sustainable farming and carbon credits for agriculture. We are saving them OPEX in terms of diesel savings and also in terms of labor efficiencies. I come from a world when, phones used to cost $20, $30. Now all of us are comfortable paying more than $1,000 sometimes for a phone. The same thing has happened with smart devices when we think about thermostats or security doorbells, smart ones, or security cameras. Once we digitally transform a machine, the value provided to the end user is a lot higher. So we actually feel that our tractor is affordable in terms of fruits and vegetables farmers being able to access the tech and get the savings. But long term, there's nothing on this tractor that prevents us from continuing to drive the cost of the device down to where every farmer in the world can eventually buy a tractor powered with Monarch technology or a Monarch-like tractor.
Hydrogen is the universe's most abundant element. It's everywhere, it's in anything. It's number 1 on the periodic table, but actually getting it and using it as a form of clean energy has been very tough. For the last 30 years, a lot of big companies around the world have been trying to figure out how to make hydrogen attainable, use it as a power source for a fuel cell, as a stationary energy source, a way to power buildings. It hasn't really worked out up to this point, but the last few years, things are beginning to change.
Excitement is building up specifically around green hydrogen. This is a way of making hydrogen that uses 0 carbon inputs and produces no emissions other than oxygen. In the US, nearly all of the hydrogen used in oil refining, food processing, and other industrial processes is considered gray. This means it is extracted from natural gas using processes that generate carbon dioxide. If green hydrogen can be used at large scale instead of gray hydrogen, this would make it a powerful tool against climate change, an unlimited source of energy, and a very lucrative business internationally.
We're in Rochester, New York at Plug Power, which wants to be one of the leaders in this new emerging technology, manufacturing both fuel cells, which can power a vehicle or generate electricity on a stationary system, and also making electrolyzers, devices that take water and electricity and make hydrogen to power those fuel cells. And we're speaking with Dan O'Connell here at the Gigafactory that Plug runs. And tell me a little bit about what we're looking at here. This is an electrolyzer, and what does the electrolyzer do exactly? How does this work?
This is an electrolyzer, and this is a 1 megawatt unit. And what this means is we can put a megawatt of power into it and make 420 kilograms of hydrogen. What we do is we put electricity in, we put purified water in, the catalyst inside splits apart the hydrogen and oxygen and water, and we capture that hydrogen and use it to fuel vehicles. Depending upon the capacity of the hydrogen on board storage inside the vehicle, but they usually use around 20 kilograms, so you could probably fill about 20 vehicles off of 1 megawatt electrolyzer, or you can think of it as like 400 standard sedan vehicles.
Next to you, we have the fuel cell stack. What is this doing?
Yeah, you can think about the electrolyzer splitting the water into hydrogen and oxygen, and requiring power Here we want to take that hydrogen and turn it back into water by combining it with oxygen and thereby generating electricity and use that electricity to do some work for us.
Plug Power's technology supplies hydrogen for a number of applications, including as a fuel for stationary energy generation and fuel for trucks. But the company's primary market is material handling in the form of hydrogen-powered forklifts. Plug Power says about 65,000 forklifts are being powered by their hydrogen at large companies such as Amazon, Walmart, and Home Depot.
So a forklift driver will drive up to a pump, just like you do today, make a couple of connections, and once those connections are made, you'll be able to put a kilogram of hydrogen on board the forklift and be able to run for 8 hours.
And the hydrogen's coming out in what form? Is it liquid? Is it gas?
No, it comes out as gas at 350 bar or 5,000 psi. We take the water off, and when we get all the data off, every time it refuels, we monitor everything going on with that stack inside of that fuel cell unit to be able to determine what's going on. We can predict life, we can predict component failures, so it's really a wealth of data that we get every single time it refills.
When did the transition really happen where you started to see hydrogen fuel cell powered forklifts replace other types of technologies?
Yeah, about 8 or 9 years ago, we started a small fleet at Amazon, and we had half of them with batteries and half of them with fuel cells. The forklift drivers loved the fuel cell ones because of what we talked about, the power, the range, and the recharge time. So the fuel cells started to win out. We've seen probably around a 10% efficiency improvement at those warehouses where we've converted over to fuel cell.
Another big player in the green hydrogen race is a company most people would probably not expect. Cummins, the world's largest diesel engine maker. Its clean tech division is known as Accelera, and we had the chance to visit its Canadian operations in Mississauga, Ontario.
At this facility, we actually have a number of buildings. The building that we're in right now is a building we kind of refer to as the fuel cell building or the fuel cell technology building. In this particular building, we do have a small manufacturing cell that makes fuel cells for general use in various industry, as well as we develop the next generation of fuel cells. We have a large R&D component to the folks that work here. About 30 years of history we tried to capture in this small museum. And what you're seeing here, Alan, across the shelving is a progression of fuel cell technology development that started off way back in the mid-1990s when we became, first of all, a test station company that was building test stations which people who were developing fuel cells would need. And then we started to test people's fuel cells until we finally ourselves decided to go into the fuel cell business with special focus on commercial vehicles. So we were not a fuel cell for passenger car company, we were a fuel cell for commercial vehicle company as Hydrogenics. And in the shelving units here you see a number of years, the 2000s, the early 2000s. In these days we were making fuel cells that when they lasted an hour or a day, we'd pop champagne bottles, if you will.
So here at this facility, you're developing high-powered fuel cell power systems and electrolyzers, but on the fuel cell stack, the fuel cell motor, or engine, I guess, if you want to call it, you're developing something that would be very powerful enough to actually operate a Class 8 semi-truck. Tell us a little bit about what we're looking at right here. What is this unit exactly?
Yeah, this is powerful when paired with its brother, another one just like this. So it's twin, I will say. This is our 4th generation fuel cell, which really shows the commitment that Cummins and Accelera have had to continuing to develop this technology over time. We started with our 1st generation of fuel cells and 2nd and 3rd in the 30, the 40, the 45 kilowatt spaces. Those were low pressure technology. As we advanced the technology, what we found was that we needed to move to a variable pressure, which allows for more power density. This is a 150 kilowatt stack, and as I mentioned, it will be paired with another. We're taking a modular platform approach to have 300 kilowatts of power to commercialize the system for heavy-duty vehicles. Class 8 in North America.
Obviously, you know, Cummins is a giant in the trucking industry. It's the world's largest diesel engine manufacturer. Is it a little curious that it's also pivoting into something like hydrogen fuel cell, which would seem to be a competing technology eventually with its diesel tech?
We actually see the diesel technology as an enabler to get to more advanced technologies because we're leveraging the innovation of Cummins, which is a company that's over 100 years old. We have significant experience in terms of understanding applications and duty cycles and how the products work in the real market, and then we take that and the system integration skills we apply to the hydrogen fuel cell. So we actually think that the core technology is a huge enabler as to why we're able to be successful in the long term with our Destination Zero strategy.
To see some of Accelera's hydrogen trucks being worked on and driven on public roads, we toured its facility in West Sacramento, California.
Here at the West Sacramento facility, we do powertrain integration and we focus on fuel cell powertrains. So we install fuel cells, we install batteries, motors, everything to make the trucks run as a fuel cell vehicle. And then we do testing out of this facility and we do support for service and validation. So the range we're hoping to get, it varies by application, but when we look at long haul trucking, for example, we're targeting at least 500 miles, preferably even 600 or 700 miles in the long run, maybe after 2030. But in the near term, we know we can get 450 miles in a trucking application, a Class 8 truck. That's really exciting because there are battery vehicles, Class 8 trucks, that can get around 300 to 400 miles. But when you put the full weight and the full drive cycle that these trucks are going to be put into, they don't get 450 miles, contrary to what some battery electric vehicles might say. And so for those really intense applications, 450 miles is a really big deal for a zero-emission powertrain.
In addition to long-distance trucking, Accelera is also involved with hydrogen-powered trains. It already has a number of clean trains running in Europe in a partnership with Alstom. And recently, it helped power the first hydrogen train in North America.
This is what we call an FCC, a fuel cell composition. This fuel cell composition also goes in pairs. There are two that are mounted to the roof of passenger trains. And Accelera is actually powering the world's first hydrogen-fueled commercial passenger train in operation in Germany. We've already delivered over 40 trains. We have another 10 that are being delivered later this year and then several next year as well. So our European fleet will actually be very substantial in size. Just this summer, here in Canada, up in Quebec, we ran a demonstrator train for 3 months, from June just until the end of September when it concluded, from Quebec up to Charlevoix. And it was the first North American passenger train powered by hydrogen fuel. And the reason we wanted to do this demonstration project, which is also in partnership with our key customer in Europe, Alstom Trains, is to show the marketability and the capability of hydrogen propulsion technology across different environments and different duty cycles. And one of the things that made that demonstrator project really unique was that it encompassed the whole end-to-end hydrogen ecosystem. The hydrogen that was powering that train was created by an electrolyzer purchased by another one of our partners, Harnois Energies. Accelera was able to provide the electrolyzer, which generated the hydrogen, which then powered the hydrogen fuel cell train.
The train we brought to Quebec is one of the test trains that we had for the testing campaign for the first generation, because we wanted to make sure we actually demonstrate its operability here in North America. The feedback has been great, and frankly, passengers, but also we've had a lot of delegations, international delegations coming, having interest in the train. Governor of Massachusetts and Vermont and Maine came to actually tour the train, and everyone realizes that first, it's real, it actually carries passengers, it's smooth, it's very quiet, it's an enjoyable ride. So we've had tremendous feedback.
To get a closer look at Accelera's electrolyzers, Alex Savelli, the company's managing director for hydrogen technologies, walked me through an assembly area. He tells me one of these machines uses about 5 megawatts of input power and produces about 2 tons of hydrogen per day.
So that would be, to put in perspective, would be enough to
to run about 60 buses, like on the type of transit application for a day.
Okay.
But then you have some customers that want sometimes 3, 4, 5 of these machines. One customer that we have, Air Liquide, up in Bécancour, north of Quebec, has actually 4 of these machines. And they're basically using it for industrial gas production. But that plant has been running for almost 3 years now. It's actually the largest PEM plant operating in the world today.
Who are your primary customers? Who is buying these?
In the short term, a lot of the industrial gas companies, the merchant gas companies, folks like Air Liquide, Linde, Air Products. But we also have, also done a few projects with, folks on the power generation space. So the first 5 units that we produced out of here, they're in the process of being commissioned at Florida Power and Light.
Okay.
And they're going to basically be producing green hydrogen to decarbonize power production. So they're going to blend some of this hydrogen in a combined cycle turbine that today uses natural gas. They'll start blending hydrogen to decarbonize, electricity production. We also have sold quite a few of these, some of these semiconductor plants that are being, inshored back into the U.S., from the CHIPS Act. Hydrogen is one of the gases you require to produce chips. And then, more recently, there's a lot of interest in e-fuels. So if you think about sustainable aviation fuel, e-methanol, ammonia, all the way from smaller projects to very large projects, for that type of application. The beauty of hydrogen, if you think about it, it's a very versatile molecule, right? Because it can be used as a fuel for mobility, but then it can also be used as an energy carrier. So if you want to move, molecules from North America to Europe, sort of help with some of the energy crunch that Europe is going through, you can also use hydrogen for that.
So with all of its potential, what are the remaining obstacles for green hydrogen to be more widely used? One significant factor that Accelera, Plug Power, and other hydrogen companies are waiting on is a production tax credit for clean hydrogen in Section 45V of the Inflation Reduction Act. In particular, they're waiting for the U.S. Treasury Department to clarify guidelines on what forms of hydrogen fuel will qualify as clean and low or no carbon enough to receive a tax credit. The cleanest methods of hydrogen production would qualify for up to $3 per kilogram. But if the guidelines are made too lenient, there is a fear that less clean hydrogen production could create millions of tons of greenhouse gas emissions and undermine the cleanest hydrogen producers. Another factor to consider is the U.S. Energy Department's recent designation of 7 hydrogen hubs across the country that will share $7 billion in government funding and $43 billion in commitments from companies. At Plug Power, I asked the company's VP of Electrolyzer Technology, Courtney Middlestat, for his thoughts on hydrogen's future.
What do you think needs to happen and what's going to happen to sort of build out the hydrogen economy and make it a more widely used energy source in a range of applications beyond what it's going into today?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And what will happen and what it comes down to is the cost. Of course, it's absolutely the cost. So originally, where you're seeing the hydrogen, where Plug was able to find a niche for hydrogen right from the beginning was for the forklift trucks. So there, even electrolysis can be competitive right now because the hydrogen has to be at high pressure and it has to be very, very pure to operate in a fuel cell. So in that small market, we can compete today. We're getting, as our costs come down, we're getting the next area that's willing to pay a little bit of a price premium is hydrogen as a chemical, not hydrogen as a fuel. But what's also coming down, what affects us even more than our cost is the cost of the renewable energy. Renewable energy, as you know, solar and wind, those costs continue to come down and down. So for instance, if in some areas, the cost of solar is as low as 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Now it takes 50 kilowatt hours to make 1 kilogram of hydrogen. Okay. And 1 kilogram of hydrogen is about the equivalent of a gallon of gasoline. So again, you get that green solar hydrogen for 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and you use 50 kilowatt hours to make a kilogram of hydrogen. So you can see how quite quickly we can get under $2 for the cost of a kilogram of hydrogen. The Department of Energy has a goal for it to get all the way down to $1. Right. And at $1, we are competitive in so many areas, and that's why you see the enthusiasm for hydrogen so high now.
certainly one of the challenges is understanding the adoption curve, understanding the demand and how fast that will grow. And I think the factors that are affecting that adoption are price of hydrogen and infrastructure, so availability. So the customers aren't going to say order 1,000 trucks if they don't have a fueling station for 1,000 trucks, right? So infrastructure is one of the main challenges. The other is cost. Right now, the material to make fuel cells and the other parts of the fuel cell electric vehicle are still a little bit expensive, and so there's a cost premium over a diesel and even over a battery electric. But that cost is coming down, and that's partly what we're trying to do, is get that cost down. And so when the cost comes down and the infrastructure is available, then the TCO, we call it, the total cost of ownership for our customers, will make sense, and they'll be able to basically replace their whole fleets with fuel cell electric trucks.
There are still a number of things that need to happen to make that a reality in North America. On the infrastructure side, the production of hydrogen, for example, is high on the agenda across US and Canada, but investments have to be made to really produce hydrogen. Green hydrogen is better, obviously. It's coming from renewable electricity. And then there's discussions that have to happen around distribution of hydrogen, the network and stuff like that. And then the incentivization of that kind of initiatives against keeping kind of the old diesel trains. We have in North America 27,000 diesel locomotives, and the territory is pretty much not electrified. 1% of the tracks are actually covered by catenaries, and that's to be compared to 60% in Europe. So there's a huge fleet which needs to be replaced at some point, and there's a very low electrification rate. So in essence, that could be really a perfect match to trains like that, which are basically running without catenary at zero emission. But there's a lot of things that need to happen, and some states are moving faster than others, but definitely something that we're watching, and we want to mature the technology and make it fit for the conditions that we have in North America. The long distances, the big freight trains, for example, require a specific design that we're still maturing.
Clearly, there's still a lot more that needs to happen before green hydrogen is as present in our lives as gasoline or batteries. As other large economies such as Japan and Australia set their strategies for competing in the hydrogen space, the U.S. will have to make sure it can ensure its role as a major player. And the decisions it makes now, particularly around how to define clean hydrogen, could determine future jobs, pollution levels, profits, and whether or not America will hit its net zero emissions targets by 2050.